Mark Lofts in the studios of Freedom Media WA. We did mean to bring you this stream on Friday evening. We were here 4:30 ready to go and bring you a debate in the UK Parliament that Andrew Bridgen MP over there has been fighting long and hard. Thanks Joshua for that comment saying that the audio is now good. As I said, it's many moving pieces to this puzzle, but we are away now. So to recap, we were here, Dr. Mark, till 8:30.
That's right.
On that particular day, and they were doing everything in the UK Parliament to make sure that they weren't going to get his particular debate up.
That's right. Delay it as long as possible.
Yeah. And it certainly seems, but what we did find is that leading up to or on Friday in the UK Parliament, they had a debate on the COVID-19 compensation bill, and that's a bill that they're looking to, that is actually has been introduced, but you are finding some British MPs looking to make some amendments to that bill. And simply, I guess, come about because of the number and the seriousness of the particular injuries that people have been caused as a result of the COVID-19. Now, that's not to detract from Andrew Bridgen's his particular motion, because it was particularly good. As I said, you will hear that he did a lot. But we are going to bring you some of that debate, and Dr. Mark will be commentating on that because there were some exceptionally good points that were made in relation to that. So I think without any further ado, we're going to kick off and bring you Andrew Bridgen, MP from the UK Parliament. This was Friday afternoon on his debate on the excess deaths in relation to that. And I will just say that Catherine's just on her comment just there, and you will hear as the bill came on, there was and again they did everything they could to try and mask the amount of applause coming from the public gallery. There was a couple of points through the debate. So I think you left about 8:45, Dr. Mark.
That's right. When I heard it later, you could easily hear the cheering from the public gallery.
Yeah, it came on about sort of 9:30 Perth time, which was quite late. And you will see very, very abrupt the way that they ended that. But I think we'll jump straight into it.
Question is that this House do now adjourn. It's Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We've experienced more excess deaths since July 2021 than the whole of 2020. Unlike the pandemic, however, these deaths are not disproportionately of the old. In other words, the excessive deaths are striking down people in the prime of life. But no one seems to care. I fear history will not judge this House kindly. Worse still, in a country supposedly committed to free and frank exchange of views, it appears that no one cares that no one cares. Well, I care, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I credit those members here in attendance today who also care. And I'd also like to thank the Honourable Member for Lincoln for his support, and I'm sorry that he couldn't attend today's debate. It's taken a lot of effort and more than 20 rejections to be allowed to raise this topic, but at last we're here to discuss the number of people dying. Nothing could be more serious. Numerous countries are currently gripped in a period of unexpected mortality, and no one wants to talk about it. It's quite normal for death numbers to fluctuate up and down by chance alone. But what we're seeing here is a pattern repeated across countries, and the rise has not let up. I'll give way to my honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful, and can I commend him for the tenacious way he's battled on this particular issue. I certainly admire him for that. I just wondered where he found the media was in all of this, because of course during the COVID pandemic, every day the media, particularly the BBC, couldn't wait to tell us how many people had died in that particular day without any context of those figures whatsoever. But they seem to have gone strangely quiet over these excess deaths now.
Gentleman for his intervention. He's absolutely right.
Here we go. The same issue again. Thanks, Josh, for that. So we're just making comment there that we've experienced the same thing with the media here in Australia, that they brought minute by minute details about those that have contracted COVID, but nothing on it since. So, and we will continue on.
The media have let the British public down badly. There will be a full press pack going out to all media outlets following my speech with all the evidence to back up all the claims I'll make in that speech, but I don't doubt there'll be no mention of it in the mainstream media. You might think that a debate about excess deaths is going to be full of numbers. This speech does not have that many numbers because most of the important numbers have been kept hidden. Other data has been oddly presented in a distorted way and concerned people seeking to highlight important findings and ask questions have found themselves inexplicably under attack. Before debating excess deaths, it's important to understand how excess death is determined. To understand if there is an excess, by definition, you need to estimate how many deaths it would have been expected. The Organisation of Economic Cooperation and Development used 2015 to 2019 as a baseline, and the Government's Office of Health Disparities and Improvement uses 2015 to 2019 baseline modelled to allow for ageing, and I've used that data here. Unforgivably, the Office of National Statistics have included deaths in 2021 as part of their baseline calculation for expected deaths, as if there was anything normal about the deaths in 2021. By exaggerating the number of deaths expected, the number of excess can be minimised. Why would the ONS want to do that? There's just too much that we don't know, and it's not good enough, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The ONS published promptly each week the number of deaths that were registered. And while this is commendable, it's not the data point that really matters. There's a total failure to collect, never mind publish, data on deaths that are referred for investigation to the coroner. Why does this matter? A referral means that it can be many months, and given the backlog, many years before a death is formally registered. Needing to investigate the cause of a death is fair enough. Failing to record when the death happened is not. Because of this problem, we actually have no idea how many people actually died in 2021. Even now, the problem is greatest for the younger age groups, where there's a higher proportion of deaths are investigated. This data failure is unacceptable. It must change. There's nothing in a coroner's report that can bring anyone back from the dead, and those deaths should be reported. The youngest age groups are important not only because they should have their whole lives ahead of them. If there is a new cause of excess mortality across the board, it would not be noticed so much in the older cohorts because the extra deaths would be drowned out amongst the expected deaths. However, in the youngest cohorts, that is not the case. There were nearly 2 extra deaths a day in the second half of 2021 among 15 to 19-year-old males, but potentially even more if those referred to the coroner were fully included. In a judicial review of the decision to vaccinate yet younger children, the ONS refused in court to give anonymised details about these deaths. They admitted that the data they were withholding was statistically significant. And I quote, they said, "The ONS recognises that more work could be undertaken to examine the mortality rates of young people in 2021 and intends to do so once more reliable data are available." How many more extra deaths in 15 to 19-year-olds will it take to trigger such work? Surely the ONS should be desperately keen to investigate deaths in young men. Why else have an independent body charged with examining mortality data? Surely the ONS has a responsibility to collect data from the coroners to produce timely information. Let's move on to old people, because most deaths in the old are registered promptly, and we do have a better feel for how many older people are dying. Deaths from dementia and Alzheimer's show what we ought to expect. There was a period of high mortality coinciding with COVID and lockdowns, but ever since there have been fewer deaths than expected. After a period of high mortality, we expect, and historically have seen, a period of low mortality because those who have sadly died cannot die again. Those whose deaths were slightly premature because of COVID and lockdowns died earlier than they otherwise would have. This principle should hold true for every cause of death and every age group, But that's not what we're seeing. Even for the over 85-year-olds, according to the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities, there were 8,000 excess deaths, 4% above the expected levels, for the 12 months starting in July 2020. That includes all of the autumn 2020 wave of COVID, when we had tiering, the second lockdown, and it includes all of the first COVID winter. However, for the year starting July 2022, there have been over 18,000 excess deaths in this age group, 9% above expected levels, more than twice as many in a period when there should have been a deficit. And when deaths from diseases previously associated with old age were actually fewer than expected. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've raised my concerns around NG163 and the use of midazolam and morphine, which may have caused and may still be causing premature deaths in the vulnerable. But that is, sadly, a debate for another day. There were just over 14,000 excess deaths in the under 65-year-olds before vaccination.
Just going to jump in on that that particular point there, Dr. Mark. When he's talking about the use of diazepam and morphine, you know, for those that are being treated for COVID, I'm guessing.
That's right. Where would be used to make a person who's respiratorily distressed, to calm them down a bit. It would only have certain judicious use in hospitals mainly, especially if a person's put on a respirator. Because if a person has a respiratory problem, they're short of breath from a heart attack, the first thing you give people is morphine. With a respiratory infection, if the person's very distressed, you would give them morphine, but that's rather unusual. If you're going to put them on a respirator, you want to give something that would relax them, like diazepam or morphine. But they're only there to relax the patient, they're not there to treat the disease.
And just the comment there, Hannah's saying midazolam.
That's a different thing. This midazolam they were giving people, it's related to diazepam. They were sticking people on respirators and they were giving them this midazolam anyway, and it's basically just to shut the people down when they're elderly and basically kill them by sticking them either in a corner of the room, or if they put them on a respirator, giving them midazolam there and basically killing them slowly by depressing their respiratory centre. It's improper medicine and should never have been done.
And, you know, I guess tragically and sadly, there's a comment there coming in from Sue saying that that's exactly what they did with her dad in residential care back in South Australia. So, yeah, terribly sorry to hear that, Sue. But we are just going to jump back to Andrew Bridgen. But hopefully that's a little bit of an explanation there. That as Anne-Marie's just commenting now, saying that your explanation, it will help some people understand a little bit about that. So we're going to try not and interrupt it too much, but I think there's a couple of points like this one that that we can actually jump into and have Dr. Mark here. Of course, while Dr. Mark's here, that's exactly, we can tap into his extensive knowledge, and that's why he's here.
From April 2020 to the end of March 2021. However, since that time, there's been over 21,000 excess deaths, ignoring the registration delay problem. The majority, 58% of these deaths, were not attributed to COVID. We turned society upside down before vaccination for fear of excess deaths from COVID. Today we have substantially more excess deaths, and in younger people, and there's complete and eerie silence, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The evidence is unequivocal. There was a clear stepwise increase in mortality following the vaccine rollout. There was a reprieve in the winter of 2021-22 because there were fewer than expected respiratory deaths, but otherwise the excess has been incessantly at this high level. Ambulance data for England provides another clue. Ambulance calls for life-threatening emergencies were running at a steady 2,000 calls per day until the vaccine rollout. From then it rose to 2,500 daily, and calls have stayed at this level since. The surveillance systems designed to spot a safety problem have all flashed red, but no one's looking. Claims for personal independence payments for people who've developed a disability and cannot work rocketed with the vaccine rollout, and it's continued to rise ever since. The same was seen in the USA, also started with a vaccine rollout, not with COVID. A study to determine the vaccination status of a sample of such claimants would be relatively quick and inexpensive to perform. Yet nobody seems interested in ascertaining this vital information. Officials have chosen to turn a blind eye to this disturbing, irrefutable and frightening data, much like Nelson did, but for far less honourable reasons. He would be ashamed of us, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Furthermore, data that has been used to sing the praises of the vaccines is deeply flawed. Only one COVID-related death was prevented in each of the initial major trials that led to authorisation of the vaccines, and that is taking their data entirely at face value, whereas a growing number of inconsistencies and anomalies suggest we ought not to do this. Extrapolating from that means that between 15,000 and 20,000 people had to be injected to prevent a single death from COVID. To prevent a single COVID hospitalisation, over 1,500 people needed to be injected. The trial data showed that 1 in 800 injected people had a serious adverse event, meaning they were hospitalised or had a life-changing or life-threatening condition. The risk of this was twice as high as the chance of preventing a COVID hospitalisation. We're harming 1 in 800 people to supposedly save 1 in 20,000. This is madness. The strongest claims have too often been based on modelling, carried out on the basis of flawed assumptions. Where observational studies have been carried out, researchers will correct for age and comorbidities to make the vaccines look better. However, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they never correct for socio-economic or ethnic differences that would make the vaccines look worse. This matters. For example, claims of higher mortality in less vaccinated regions in the United States took no account of the fact that this was the case before the vaccines were rolled out. That is why studies that claim to show the vaccines prevented COVID deaths also showed a marked effect in them preventing non-COVID deaths. The prevention of non-COVID deaths is always a statistical illusion, and claims of preventing COVID deaths should not be assumed when that illusion has not been corrected for. And when it is corrected for, the claims of efficacy for the vaccines vanish with it. COVID disproportionately killed people from ethnic minorities and lower socio-economic groups. But during the 2020, during the pandemic, the deaths among the most deprived were up by 23%, compared to 17% for the least deprived. However, since 2022, the pattern has reversed, with 5% excess mortality amongst the most deprived, compared to 7% among the least deprived. These deaths are being caused by something different. In 2020, the excess was highest in the oldest cohorts, and there were fewer than expected deaths amongst the younger age groups. But since 2022, the 50 to 64-year-old cohort has had the highest excess mortality. Even the youngest age groups are now seeing substantial excess, with a 9% excess in the under 50s since 2022 compared to 5% now in the over 75 group. Despite London being a younger region, the excess in London is only 3%, whereas it's higher in every more heavily vaccinated region of the UK. And it should be noted, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that London is famously the least vaccinated region in the UK by some margin. Studies comparing regions on a larger scale show the same thing. There are studies from the Netherlands, Germany and the whole world, each showing that the highest mortality after vaccination was seen in the most heavily vaccinated regions. So we need to ask, what are people dying of? Since 2022, there has been 11% excess in ischemic heart disease deaths and a 16% excess in heart failure deaths. In the meantime, cancer deaths, only 1% above expected levels, which is further evidence that it is not simply some other factor that affects deaths across the board, such as a failing to account for an ageing population or a failing NHS. In fact, the excess itself has a seasonality with a peak in the winter months. The fact it returns to baseline levels in summer is a further indication that this is not due to some statistical error or an ageing population alone. Dr. Claire Craig from the Heart Group first highlighted a stepwise increase in cardiac arrest calls after the vaccine rollout in May 2021, and Heart have repeatedly raised concerns about the increase in cardiac deaths, and they have every reason to be concerned. 4 participants in the vaccine group of the Pfizer trial died from cardiac arrest, compared to only 1 in the placebo group. Overall, there were 21 deaths in the vaccine group up to March 2021, compared to 17 in the placebo group. And there are serious anomalies about the reporting of the deaths within this trial, with the deaths in the vaccine group taking much longer to report than those in the placebo group. And that's highly suggestive, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of a significant bias in what was supposed to be a blinded trial. An Israeli study clearly showed an increase in cardiac hospital attendances among 18 to 39-year-olds that correlated with vaccination, not with COVID. There have now been several post-mortem studies demonstrating a causal link between vaccination and coronary artery disease, leading to death up to 4 months after the last dose. And we need to remember that the safety trial was cut short to only 2 months. So there's no evidence of any vaccine safety beyond that point. The decision to unblind the trials after 2 months and vaccinate the placebo group is nothing less than a public health scandal. Everyone involved failed in their duty to the truth, but no one cared.
There we go. So we're just saying, Dr. Mark, that I'll get my head around this in a moment. That he mentioned they unblinded the study. So could you just explain what that actually means?
That's right. When they unblinded the study, it's supposed to mean that they've got such clear results in positive for the use of the vaccine that they then say, right, we've got to jab everybody because the vaccine has proven so safe. But unfortunately, their criteria were false, and they were basically looking for an excuse to jab everybody so that there would be no control group. And in this case, they have abused what should be proper science.
There we go, thank you.
The one place that can help us understand exactly what caused this is Australia. Australia had almost no COVID when vaccines were first introduced, making them the perfect control group. The state of South Australia had only 1,000 cases of COVID across its whole population by December.
Again, I've just lost this for some reason. Just bear with me while I get that up. In fact, I might just bring this one up and just have... One thing, just while I sort of look at that I just want to actually highlight, and that is that in the House of Commons, you're looking at about 650 MPs that actually sit there.
That's right. It's nearly 3 times the size of ours.
And from what you can see, in there is next to nobody sitting in there. Of course, Andrew Bridgen, there's been a lot of media talk about when he's been giving his speeches in the past, that that MPs have been getting up and moving out of the House of Commons. We are doing this live, so just bear with me just while I work out what actually is going on there. But what I am going to do is I'm just going to cut through to give you an idea of the House of Commons.
If you like, I could discuss the Israeli figures because he mentioned them briefly.
Okay, so you can just see there, that's a picture that I've just brought up. That's the full House of Commons, I guess, sitting. As I said, 650 members there that can or would ordinarily sit and report there. Thanks, Sue, for your comments there. Just that it's great reporting. So we're really not trying to detract from Andrew Bridgen's speech, but for some reason the media player has just decided to not like it, and I'm just making sure that it's nothing that the algorithm's doing behind the scenes. Dr. Mark, you were saying, explain the...
Yes, the Israeli findings. As he pointed out, young people between the ages of 18 and 39 were dying at greater rates. This is after the government in Israel jabbed ordinary Israelis. I'd like to point out that Israel's jabbing has been one step ahead of all other countries. When we were having the fourth COVID jab, the Israelis were already up to the fifth jab. Now, they've been very, very strict on making sure the people are jabbed. That's their Israeli population, and particularly Israeli soldiers. Soldiers in nearly all armies are strongly jabbed for whatever. So it's those unfortunates in the army who've been particularly strongly jabbed. Right at the beginning, many Palestinians, those who are non-Jewish, either Israeli Arabs, and particularly the Palestinians who don't have Israeli citizenship, they thought they were missing out and they demanded to get jabs from wherever they could, and they've gotten sick from the jabs just like the Israelis. But I'd like particularly to point out that the 18 to 38-year-old group are people of military age, and they are the ones who are being injured by the jabs. They are the ones who are hoping to have children in the future, and it's up to ordinary Israelis to realise and ask themselves whether their own government is really supporting them. Is their own government on side, or are they trying to damage their bodies just as our Australian and British governments are? It's time for people to take stock of what's happening, because this nonsense, this COVID imposture has been going on for 4 years now, and there is no sign of it letting up. And Andrew Bridgen is one of the very few people who's been allowed to speak about it. And as you can see from the nearly empty Parliament, there's a bipartisan prejudice from the Conservatives and from the Labor Party to suppress this vital evidence.
And we can just, I'm not sure why it's actually not allowing, it just seems that something, that file's corrupted. I'm trying to just pick it up directly off the web, so again, just bear with me whilst I do that. The joys of going live. And of course, I mean, on the, Israel, and we can see Gaza, and this isn't a stream to talk about, that per se, but I've seen media reports that Australian expats in looking to get out of Gaza have even now been asked about their vaccine status. And you look at the national airline Qantas, there's been reports of Qantas offering to evacuate expats, but of course they've been flying into places like London, dropping them off there and saying, now you're on your own, make your way back to Australia. And by the way, whether they're going to make it difficult to travel because of particular status of passports.
That's right, that could all come back again with vaccine passports, because when you have war going on in Ukraine or Gaza, you have the spread of disease.
So I think I have just rectified that issue. Again, the joys of going live.
Many years before a death is formally registered. Needing to investigate the cause of a death is fair enough. Failing to record when the death happened is not. Because of this problem, we actually have no idea how many people actually died in 2021. Even now, the problem is greatest for the younger age groups, where there's a higher proportion of deaths are investigated. This data failure is unacceptable. It must change. There's nothing in a coroner's report that can bring anyone back from the dead, and those deaths should be reported. The youngest age groups are important not only because they should have their whole lives ahead of them. If there is a new cause of excess mortality across the board, it would not be noticed so much in the older cohorts because the extra deaths would be drowned out amongst the expected deaths. However, in the youngest cohorts, that is not the case. There were nearly 2 extra deaths a day in the second half of 2021 among 15 to 19-year-old males, but potentially even more if those referred to the coroner were fully included. In a judicial review of the decision to vaccinate yet younger children, the ONS refused in court to give anonymised details about these deaths. They admitted that the data they were withholding was statistically significant, and I quote, they said, "The ONS recognises that more work could be undertaken to examine the mortality rates of young people in 2021 and intends to do so once more reliable data are available." How many more extra deaths in 15 to 19-year-olds will it take to trigger such work? Surely the ONS should be desperately keen to investigate deaths in young men. Why else have an independent body charged with examining mortality data? Surely the ONS has a responsibility to collect data from the coroners to produce timely information. Let's move on to old people, because most deaths in the old are registered promptly, and we do have a better feel for how many older people are dying. Deaths from dementia and Alzheimer's show what we ought to expect. There was a period of high mortality coinciding with COVID and lockdowns, but ever since there have been fewer deaths than expected. After a period of high mortality, we expect, and historically have seen, a period of low mortality, because those who have sadly died cannot die again. Those whose deaths were slightly premature because of COVID and lockdowns died earlier than they otherwise would have. This principle should hold true for every cause of death and every age group, but that's not what we're seeing. Even for the over 85-year-olds, according to the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities, there were 8,000 excess deaths, 4% above the expected levels, for the 12 months starting in July 2020. That includes all of the autumn 2020 wave of COVID, when we had tiering, the second lockdown, and it includes all of the first COVID winter. However, for the year starting July 2022, there have been over 18,000 excess deaths in this age group, 9% above expected levels, more than twice as many in a period when there should have been a deficit. And when deaths from diseases previously associated with old age were actually fewer than expected. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've raised my concerns around NG163 and the use of midazolam and morphine, which may have caused and may still be causing premature deaths in the vulnerable. But that is, sadly, a debate for another day. There were just over 14,000 excess deaths in the under 65-year-olds before vaccination from April 2020
I do think I'm
to the end
just
of
going
March
to just
2021.
pause it a little bit
However,
there,
since
because I
that
think we've
split in the
covered
vaccine
this bit.
group to March 2021 compared to efficacy or safety to provide the data. That means there was never a trial.
And I'll just say again, apologies there. So it just seems that the package that that I had edited out just corrupted halfway through. So I've actually now just gone to the web page and picking it up from there. Of course, I didn't take note of the minute mark, but it may have been different in the edit. So here we go. We'll just keep going.
On the Pfizer product that was actually rolled out to the public, and that product has never been compared to the product that was actually trialled. The vaccine mass production processes use vats of Escherichia coli and present a risk of contamination with DNA from the bacteria as well as bacterial cell walls, which can cause dangerous reactions. This is not theoretical, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is now sound evidence that's been replicated by several labs across the world, and the mRNA vaccines were contaminated by DNA which far exceeded the usual permissible levels. Given that this DNA is enclosed in lipid nanoparticle delivery system, and it's arguable that even the permissible levels have been far too high, these lipid nanoparticles are known to enter every organ of the body, as well as this potentially causing some of the acute adverse reactions seen. There is a serious risk that this foreign bacterial DNA inserting itself into human DNA. And will anybody investigate? No, they won't. I'll give way on that point.
Conscious that time is tight, I recognise that the Honourable Gentleman is making a very, very powerful case. Does he agree with me that the government should be looking at this properly and should commission a review into the excess deaths, partly so that we can reassure our constituents that the case he's making is not in fact valid and that the vaccines have no cause behind these excess deaths?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his...
So I'm just going to pause just there and just come back to this one, because as he was asking that particular question, and I don't know whether you got that at home there, but you can hear the applause in the public gallery. Of course, the public gallery, and I did see some footage later in the afternoon where Andrew Bridgen went out and addressed those that were there in Parliament. And it was easily, 200-300 people that had turned up, and that was outside. Of course, I don't know how many were in the public gallery, but for that noise to come through, let's just, I'll just back it up just a little bit more. And just keep an ear out for this.
A very, very powerful case. Does he agree with me that the government should be looking at this properly and should commission a review into the excess deaths, partly so that we can reassure our constituents that the case he's making is not in fact valid and that the vaccines have no cause behind these excess deaths?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his support on this topic, and of course that is what exactly any responsible government.
And I am going to just cut in there as well. So Andrew Bridgen's talking about the nanolipid particles.
That's
and
right.
The fact that I guess in the early stages it was put out to the public that it would be isolated in the deltoid, and we've now seen that it hasn't. Of course, there's been some reports that it's because when they've been giving the inoculation, they haven't aspirated. Can you just explain that a little bit more?
Yes. When you aspirate, you pull back on the needle once you've injected the material. You pull back on the needle to make sure you're not in a vein, because if you then inject it, you haven't aspirated on the needle, you could push the material straight into a vein, and you're not supposed to do that. But of course, many vaccinators are careless because they've got so many people to deal with. But that's not the real problem. The real problem lies in the liposomes themselves. And I haven't told Lindsay this earlier, but the lysosomes get through the fat layers and can get into every organ in the body. You can have the mRNA for the spike protein being produced in your heart, in your testes or ovaries, or in your brain. Exactly the place to produce the spike protein that you don't want. And then your body starts making antibodies that attack your ovaries, testes, brain and heart. So this is basically a criminal action. And there's a lot more to it as well. One of the things they mentioned is that these mRNAs are grown up in bacteria called E. coli. E. coli, properly Escherichia coli, is a major bacteria, and of course it lives in human feces, hence the name coli. Now I'd like to point out that human feces consists 10% by weight of E. coli. And when you grow these you grow these mRNA up in bacteria, in these E. coli bacteria, inside the bacteria there are all these special proteins which help the bacteria survive, but these proteins are very inimical to human survival. They are called endotoxins, and if they are injected into the human body, they cause devastating damage, including cardiomyopathy and bad renal function and death. So basically what they're doing is taking material from human feces and essentially injecting it into the human body. They're not cleaning up this mRNA to be reasonably clean. They're sticking that and the endotoxin from the E. coli into these liposomes. Basically, they're injecting filth and muck into us, and it's not surprising that so many people are getting sick and dying, and now the government's trying to cover it up.
So there you go. Thank you very much, Dr. Mark, for that explanation, and we will keep going with Andrew Bridgen.
Should do. I wrote to the Prime Minister on the 7th of August 2023 with all the evidence of this, but sadly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I still await a response. What will it take to stop these products? Their complete failure to stop infection was not enough, and we all know plenty of vaccinated people who've caught and spread COVID. The mutation of the virus to a weaker variant, Omicron, that wasn't enough. The increasing evidence of the serious harms to those of us that were vaccinated, that's not enough. And now the cardiac deaths and the deaths of young people is apparently not enough either. It's high time these experimental vaccines were suspended and a full investigation into the harms they've caused initiated. History will be a harsh judge if we don't start using evidence-based medicine. We need to return to basic science, basic ethics immediately, which means listening to all voices and investigating all concerns. In conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the experimental COVID-19 vaccines are not safe and they're not effective, despite there only being limited interest in the chamber from colleagues. And I'm very grateful for those who have attended. We can see from the public gallery there is considerable public interest. I would implore all members of the House, present and those not, support calls for a 3-hour debate on this important issue. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, this might be the first debate on excess deaths in our Parliament. Indeed, it might be the first debate on excess deaths in the world. But very sadly, I promise you, it won't be the last.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for North West Leicestershire for securing this important debate. I do only have 5 minutes of the 30 minutes
This is the government spokesperson speaking now.
Debate to respond, so I will try and cover all the points if I can. Can I start by acknowledging that he is correct? We have seen an increase in excess deaths in the last year. However, his analysis is...
And you can hear there, Dr. Mark, the applause still coming from the public gallery.
That's right. And I'd like to point out also, before people declare us to be cranks for saying that this E. coli internal material, the endotoxin, is being injected into human bodies with these jabs, I'd like to point out that has been presented to the Australian Medical Professionals Society by Dr. Jeff Payne, who's a friend of mine, a chemist. He's been working on the endotoxin being involved in the production of the mRNA vaccines. And basically he's demonstrated the lethality of the vaccines, these COVID vaccines, and they should never have been used. And this is basically criminal action by our pharmacy companies and the government to hide this material, this decisive evidence.
Something I will disagree with, because the causes that he refers to are simply do not bear to the statistics that we have. There have been a combination of factors contributing to the increase in excess deaths, including in the last year high flu prevalence, the ongoing challenges of COVID-19. We had the strep A outbreak, and conditions such as heart disease, which he touched on, diabetes and cancer, because we had virtually a lockdown of routine health services over a 2-year period. Many of those are now coming forward with increased morbidity and mortality as a result of that. And starting with winter flu, the number of positive tests last year peaked at 31.8%, the highest seen in the last 6 years. And interim analysis from the UK HSA indicated the number of deaths in England associated with flu was far higher than pre-pandemic levels. So excess deaths due to flu last winter is sadly part of the answer. And he touched on the independent body of the ONS. Well, their figures show that the leading cause of death in England is still dementia, which accounts for about 10% of all deaths. But they do also look at the cause of excess deaths. And if you look at the figures as of June this year, the top 3 causes of excess deaths are respiratory illnesses, dementia, and ischemic heart disease, which is often caused by an increase in cholesterol, smoking, not having a blood pressure check. So there's a number of reasons, and they are often chronic conditions that people have had for years, decades in fact, some people, and are not acute illnesses. Now, just to touch on some of the points that he has made in these points in the 3 minutes I have left to respond. Firstly, turning to the importance of vaccination, I think it's very easy to say that there's a prevalence of high rates of COVID vaccination in people who have died, and that is correct. When 93.6% of your population has had at least 1 dose of the vaccine, there will be a high rate of vaccination in excess deaths. That is
government response here. And it would come as no surprise that she's going to counter everything that's been put forward, and really as Victoria is just picking up now, that she's not understanding what excess means, or she's trying to put the spin on another factor that could attribute to the excess.
That's right. What she did was that she forgot to mention that when the COVID started, they suddenly decided that flu didn't exist, and everyone with flu-like symptoms was designated as having COVID. Then when they declared the pandemic over, flu suddenly reappeared and started to kill people at the ordinary rates it always did in the past. And remember that it's always older people who die from the flu, because your immune system gradually gets old as you do. It's a normal part of human life. But what happened in this COVID period, everything has been misdiagnosed and misrepresented to make it out to be this terribly lethal and crippling disease. And we have to look at the wider facts that this is not just the corrupted medical system and big pharma, it's a system that's working in cahoots with corrupted big media, big corporations across the world.
And we can see, what I want to bring to your attention here, thanks Dr. Mark for that, I'm just trying to sort out some audio issues here at the same time, as you probably figured out, is just pay attention to how this debate ended.
Different to causality. I completely agree with them. There's a high prevalence rate. That is not the same as saying that that is the cause of those deaths. And the Office for National Statistics has looked then actually those who've been vaccinated generally had a lower all-cause mortality rate than the unvaccinated people since the booster introduction in 2021. And a recent study in Singapore actually found that when they looked at patients who had recovered from COVID who were unvaccinated, they showed an increased risk of by 56% more to be at risk of cardiac complications a year later compared to those who were vaccinated. So there is conflicting data on this, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with him, but I think we need to have a robust conversation on this and not to assume that one side necessarily has all the answers. Now,
Now, say when she's saying to have the robust conversation, I guess, again, to reiterate, Andrew Bridgen MP had tried for 20 past occasions to have that conversation, and hasn't been able to do so, and that's some of the problem.
That's right. All her talk there was just waffle. She's basically trying to make excuses for the vaccine rollout, since we know already that the people who have been jabbed, particularly with repeated boosters, are having a higher morbidity and mortality rate than others. And the obvious point here is that of myocarditis and pericarditis, particularly the former. Myocarditis is a rare disease. When I was working in hospitals, spending about 1.5 years doing lots of time with cardiac patients, never came across ordinary myocarditis. The only person I knew who had it was a fellow medical professional, and that was very, very unusual. And now, with a 5-year survival rate from myocarditis, I think this particular individual must be deceased now, but myocarditis was basically unheard of 30, 40 years ago, because people hadn't had a lot of these more lethal jabs, these more lethal vaccines, and the myocarditis that's been found they're trying to attribute to other conditions. I don't know, climate change. They make up all these various stories to why athletes are collapsing on the field, and many of them have been found to have myocarditis. This is the important point here, that when our athletes, our young people are dying after they've had the jab, and governments go around trying to hide what's going on, this is a very poor lookout for the rest of us, especially when we get older, and especially people with little children.
So I think it definitely won't pass the pub test there. I'll just turn my mic up a little bit more, quite hypocritical of the government to say we need to have more robust conversation when there's been concerted attempts to do so, and yet it's been the government in the UK Parliament, which I might say has been exactly the case here. In fact, if I was to categorise it, it would be worse here.
That's right. I mean, our idea of the pub test now, the term can work both ways. If you've been jabbed many times, you go to this woke type of pub, you end up just meeting people like yourselves and drink more because of all the symptoms you've got. So we have to be very careful to have an educated community right across Australia, and that's the reason for freedom media. We've got to have people understanding this before the government comes upon us again with more jabs. I can never overemphasise the fact that the more of these vaccines, the more of these jabs you get and that you give to your children, substances like aluminium, which cause autoimmune reactions, just build up in your body because you haven't got a proper way to excrete it, any more than you've got any way to remove this mRNA for the spike protein from your own blood and body once you've gotten the jab.
But, so there we go. I know the Minister is just about finished, so we will bring you the rest of here because it is particularly interesting to see you'd almost say comical. I mean, you'd have to laugh at it because there's no point crying, as to how the UK Parliament ends this debate.
Just to touch on a couple of points that he made around vaccine safety. Now, the regulator has been taking account of those who report adverse events, and I would encourage anyone who's had a side effect from any of the vaccines to use the yellow card system, to report it to their GP, because when they have been reported, the MHRA has taken action. If you look in April 21, the MHRA reacted to rare cases of concurrent thrombosis and thrombocytopenia following the AZ vaccine, which resulted in adults under 30 not being offered that vaccine. And in May 21, that was increased to the adults under 40, and particularly to the MRA vaccine in June 21, following reports of a link between COVID vaccines and myocarditis. The Commission on Human Medicines conducted an independent review, which found the incidence of this side effect was rare, but it was between 1 and 2 cases per 100,000. So when there are concerns, absolutely we must investigate those. There is no doubt about it. And for those that have experienced rare side effects from the vaccine, we had a debate earlier this afternoon about that. We do have the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme, which offers a payment of $120,000 if that is one showed to be...
Order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm terribly sorry. The House stands adjourned.
And there you go. That's it. But let's have robust discussion, and that's how the UK Parliament has ended the long overdue and awaited robust discussion.
That's right. Well, our Parliament hasn't even gotten that far. I mean, there's various senators and others speak out, but we have so many people in the Parliament who just accept the nonsense peddled by Liberal, Labor, the Greens, etc.
Many of you commenting there, what a joke. As I said, you pretty much need to laugh at that because I do find it quite perplexing.
The proceeding has ended.
I'm just going to just kill that, because what we're going to do is that was at the end of the day on Friday, and that was the UK Parliament. Just why I reset things this end. And we're just going to bring you some of the COVID compensation bill, which the Minister just referred to just then, because that debate, we were sitting there listening, waiting for this one to come on, deciding whether we were going to stream on Friday, because there was a lot of interesting comments coming on from that. And yeah, I'm just going to set things up to do that here, which I've got it in the background, which is great, and bring you some of those. And you will actually hear some competing comments in relation to that. You heard that yourself, Dr. Mark?
That's right.
On Friday.
Most of that. Yes.
And we were saying that you know, whether we should have live streamed this or not. A couple of comments there. I did put a picture up talking about the number of MPs that were in the gallery. The other thing that I just want to say as an observation is that the in-house parliamentary TV system did a tremendous amount of work to do two things. Number one is narrow the view so you can't see how empty the House was, the House of Commons. And number two, not to show how full the public gallery was. So, and I think, you know, that again just competes very much with the Minister's statement to say that we, you know, if we feel there's a problem, we want to have a recognition here and have that robust debate. Yet the optics of it, they simply don't want that to get out and see. I mean, when would you say in Parliament, when would you say that you would have an absolute full public gallery?
That'd be pretty rare. I think in Canberra, I think it might be one sitting day in 100, only when something very important was ever being discussed.
So I have that set up in the background here. This is the COVID-19 compensation bill. that they're seeking to make some explanations, and I've condensed this package. It goes for about an hour and a half, this debate. It does go for longer, and the long and the short is it was a second reading, but it was cancelled. I shouldn't say cancelled, it was adjourned for further debate because the MP that introduced it did feel as though there needed to be more debate on it. And it did get to the minister, or in fact two ministers, or the Minister for Health, and I'm not quite sure which portfolio that MP had. But here we go. I'm just going to cut over and bring you the start of this, and we'll jump in from time to time and do some commentary. It's not liking that, so I'll just cut back, but that's okay. I've got the solution fixed for that, and I'm just going to just get it to the point where it starts. It is by no means making an excuse, but you know, even to record it, to bring it to you, to take bits and pieces out, the parts that aren't really relevant, you know, I need to sit through in real time to do that. And since Friday night, because I was here quite late recording what you've just seen, it does take a bit of time. So there's just not enough time for me to be able to edit down so that it's a smooth transition, and it seems that there's perhaps something wrong with this memory disk, so I'm just...
It may be as much as £1 billion a year, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and we hear from the Prime Minister his commitment to reducing the burden of tax and the debts of this country, but why aren't we reducing this area of public expenditure? It's avoidable, we can do it, nothing's been done, and it suggests to me that there's something fundamentally wrong with the way in which this Conservative government is operating. It's not in control. The blob is in control. And can I urge my honourable...
And I'll just...
this is a bill which actually has some
explanatory. What I might do is just hand over to Dr. Mark. There you go.
People who look at the bill
if you can just
see that what we're
just
asking
explain
for
a couple of
is
things,
something that's reasonable. It doesn't need
course,
legislation.
What
All it needs
we've
is the
seen,
will on the part of the government now to act, to do the things that are set out in the...
of all of us to ensure, for example...
Okay, I think I have it.
So protecting the interests of the taxpayer.
Will I leave the House? Does Sir Christopher wish to respond?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank you. I mean, what more can one say? I mean, this is just desperate, isn't it? I mean, I would say it's no joking matter. We've made light of it, and in one sense, one of the perhaps most reasons why the blob might respond ultimately is because we're mocking it so much. But up till now, it's been very successful in preventing any action being taken on this key policy issue, which is a concern not just to national taxpayers but also to local government council taxpayers, because there's so much abuse. What is the cost to the exchequer of this at the moment? We reckon it may be as much as £1 billion a year, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and we...
Again, I don't think this is it. I'm just going
to... phrase, safe and effective, that became the COVID vaccine catchphrase.
Okay,
we'll call it that. That was repeated so many times over the last couple of years.
Start when the debate started.
But secondly, the other reason they don't want to is because it was they who...
Because if in 2007 the government then thought that... Deputy Speaker, sadly, he didn't. All he said, we are taking steps to reform vaccine damage payments.
This is a terrible situation.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that of those 220...
that their intent is to pay the people to shut them up for a while, all the people who...
On the 21st of June in 2021, that bill had a short second reading debate on Friday the 10th of September 2021.
So just pause it there and then...
Yes, see, while they're trying to give payments for people who've been vaccine damaged to try to smooth over the problem is they're getting people further and further into debt. They wasted public money to make these toxic vaccines full of endotoxin from E. coli, jab them into people's bodies, make them extremely sick. And what they're doing is getting the government further and further into debt. I mean, because the whole world economic system is not growing, capitalism is all over the world, there is no new places to exploit, to get wealth from, they basically decided to injure and kill the general population, and in doing so, get the people into debt. The ones that make the real money out of this are the pharmaceutical companies and, of course, the lawyers, because the government and all the vaccine injured are going to be fighting with each other and with government in court. The whole scheme is basically one giant Ponzi scheme, and pay the doctors $50 or whatever it is to give the jab here to their own patients. Same thing in Britain as here. And the whole of the medical and legal profession are tied up with Big Pharma and other big corporations who are controlling a corrupted government whose intent is only to get us further and further into debt. And nothing could be worse for ordinary people than this, because the Parliament is not getting to deal with the problem. It's talking about closing the gate after the horse has bolted. It's talking about compensation for people who've been vaccine injured. They will never receive enough. When you've had a small child die from a vaccine injury, or a 15 or 16-year-old boy or girl die from myocarditis, all the millions of pounds will not compensate for that.
So I think, a few comments there that hopefully aren't flagged by Facebook because it's way too controversial for there. So I think hopefully I've found it. I'm not going to fine tune it anymore, but this is the start of the debate, and we'll pick up comments.
At that time, I described the bill as being about all those who have suffered injury or even death as a result of enlisting in the war against COVID by being vaccinated. I went on to say that there's a lot more damage being done to our citizens as a result of COVID-19 vaccinations than in any other vaccination programme in history. That does not mean that it is not worthwhile. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but what is important is that if people do the right thing, they should not be denied access to reasonable compensation.
Will you give way?
Of course I will.
I'm very grateful to giving way, and I just want to pay tribute to my honourable friend for his campaign on this topic on behalf of so many of all of our constituents who write in expressing concern about the vaccine programme and particularly about the injuries scheme. And does he agree with me? It's very, very wrong for the media and indeed colleagues here to castigate campaigners for the vaccine injured as conspiracy theorists, anti-vaxxers, sort of troublemakers, when these people, as the honourable member says, are people who took the vaccine in response to a call from government, and they deserve the support of the health service and indeed the government itself if they turn out to be injured by it.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his generous comments and words, and he himself has been a very valuable member of the all-party group on this subject. And he's absolutely right to say that there are a lot of people who are our constituents in this country, but not just in this country, but elsewhere as well, who feel that they have been ignored by the powers that be. And I shall come later in my remarks to what is happening. There is a glimmer of hope here, and that is that the public inquiry into COVID-19, Lady Hallett, when she was discussing the terms of reference for what's called the fourth module of the inquiry, which is to take place next July, that she seems to be very much minded to deal with the issues which my honourable friend has mentioned and which I continue to be concerned about. But I'll come to that in a bit more detail in a minute. But can I just say that in order to emphasise that this is not just a subject for the United Kingdom, there's a book which has been published recently, and I declare an interest as having been one of the contributors to it, what's described as Canary in a COVID World, How Propaganda and Censorship Changed Our/My world. And it's a collection of essays from what are described as 34 contemporary thought leaders, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And in my essay in that, I refer very much to these issues and the failures of our own vaccine damage payment scheme to recognise that people have suffered harm and in some cases bereavement as a result of these vaccines, and that we can't any longer ignore these pressures. And it's very encouraging to read in this book about all that's happening in other parts of the world. There are contributors from Canada, the United States, the rest of Europe, and in Australia and New Zealand. So this is actually a House of Commons Library edition, but I'm going to put it back in the library, so if anybody else wants to have a look at it, they can.
Will he give way?
Yes, of course I will.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I'd also like to commend him for all the work he's done, sterling work he's done on behalf of those people who have been injured by the vaccine. Just going back to the point he made about the COVID inquiry and what Baroness Hallett said, I wouldn't want him to leave the impression that that means that the government should therefore be able to leave it to the COVID inquiry to deal with this, which of course may not fully report for many years to come. People are needing compensation payments now, and so would he agree with me that we can't leave it to the COVID inquiry, that the government should actually adopt what my honourable friend suggests in this bill, which gives a much shorter timescale for dealing with it, and get on with it, and they shouldn't use that as a get out of jail card?
Absolutely, and my honourable friend anticipates what I was going to say, because I was basically going to say later on that the government needs to take its head out of the sand, face up to the reality that this issue is now going to be debated at the inquiry next year. Already the people who have got the rights of audience at that inquiry have made their preliminary statements. And wouldn't it be so much better for the government to undertake the actions set out in this bill now, rather than waiting for the inevitable next summer? Because
pick the audio up there, so he's making the point, if you're following along, that they are going to have a full inquiry, as he said. I mean, there's a significant time lag there to July next year. That's issue number one. So much for the will of the government, the minister standing up, as you've just seen previously, saying, we want to have this robust debate. So they may want to have the robust debate, but they certainly don't want to have it in the immediate future.
That's right.
And those that would be incurring medical costs, which some of it does come out in this debate here. And of course, if that's what's going on in the UK. If we look what's happening here in the Australian Parliament, it's still very much shut down. Of course, we saw Senator Ralph Babbitt, who sought to introduce a bill to have a royal commission into the government's handling of the pandemic response. That was voted down. Surprisingly, he introduced a bill to dispense with big pharma or those pharmaceutical companies having indemnity. That actually got up with I think 9 members of the Greens supported that bill, and of course just recently this week you've had Senator Malcolm Roberts talk about setting off to the Parliamentary Legal Committee the fact that they are talking about setting the terms of reference for a royal commission in the pandemic inquiry. So to me, it seems the issue of a royal commission into the pandemic inquiry is not dead and buried.
No, it's not. There's a petition. There's a petition being made for it too, and I've signed that petition, but so far it's only got a couple of thousand people on it.
Yeah, I think to set off a motion that was agreed to. And what's interesting there with Senator Malcolm Roberts, if you look at that, I was going to bring a stream on that. The whole thing was over in under 30 seconds. It was done and dusted. He didn't even read the motion. And there was, similar to what you've seen in the UK Parliament, there was minimal people in the Parliament. And also, I guess it's telling that those that weren't in the chamber, they're of course then prevented from voting. Does it get recorded as abstain from voting? But their silence of not being in there is a sign, in my view, Dr. Markin, what do you think? That they don't want to be seen on Hansard on record as going either voting for or against?
That's right. They want to hide everything so that they're non-committal. I remember even as a child this sort of thing went on. When we first sent troops to Vietnam, it was very different to World War One. There weren't people waving from ships as the soldiers left. They sneaked them out in the middle of the night, stuck them onto HMAS Melbourne, a number of other ships, and it all sneaked out in the middle of the night in 1964. The government knew that the people wouldn't like it. Australia had no particular ideological commitment to whether Vietnam should be communist, capitalist or what, but the government had made a decision. They didn't want to tell the people one way or the other, and they just involved in dirty politics, involving the lives of our soldiers. And that's what's happening now, involving the lives of everybody being given these very toxic jabs. And we can't afford governments that treat people this way.
And I see, Catherine, your comment there that you just got kicked off YouTube. Dr. Mark and I were just having a conversation while that was playing. There perhaps may be some things here that might be interesting to as to how YouTube are going to say that. I certainly agree with the comments that Dr. Mark has said. I'm not wanting to censor what Dr. Mark is saying, and he knows
but he
that.
Might have to.
But it's more a question of if you just say those things, we know what censorship's like, and the only option or the only course of action that they will take is to kill the stream. So hence the reason, I guess we need to find a new way of trying to, decode and re-encode or encode, particular talking points. So. Thanks, Rob, for joining. Thank you for your comments there to Dr. Mark. And we certainly we're doing our bit. So you can always, if it doesn't get taken down, Rob, always redo the stream. So we'll keep going. I'll bring you back to the COVID-19 UK compensation bill.
In a sense, they've been found out now. Everybody realises that, contrary to what was the impression that was given for a very long time, that for some people, an unfortunate minority, the COVID vaccines were very bad news. In some cases, resulted in deaths and bereavements, and that it's a failure to face up to that that is at the heart of my concern, and has led me to producing this particular bill. And I'm grateful to my honourable friend for being a co-sponsor of it. And unlike many of the bills that I've introduced into this place, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a bill which actually has some explanatory notes. So people who look at the bill can see that what we're asking for is something that's reasonable. It doesn't need legislation. All it needs is the will on the part of the government now to act to do the things that are set out in the explanatory notes. So can I just say that this is an issue which, as my honourable friend has said, is not going to go away and is now actually very much on the agenda. But in the meantime, thousands of people have put in their claims, and those claims are being dealt with pitifully slowly. Only about half of them have been assessed, and some of the latest statistics I've got, and it's quite difficult drilling out of the government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, through parliamentary questions, but I have got some statistics here which say that as at the 19th of September this year, there have been 221 successful claims, which were claims which would have been successful on the basis of causation, but they fell short because they didn't meet the 60% disability threshold. And there were 142 claims which had been awarded because they did exceed the 60% threshold. So that's 363 cases where it's accepted that the disabilities suffered are as a direct consequence of the vaccine. It's interesting, isn't it, that of those 221 claims which fell below the 60% disability threshold, some 116 of them would have exceeded a 20% threshold. And doesn't that show that the government is being unreasonable in sticking to a 60% threshold rather than reducing the disability threshold in the way that I'm suggesting in this bill? Well, as at in a PQ 199535 answered on the 19th of September, I was told that from the 1st of October 2021 to the 1st of September 2023, 6,809 claims relating to COVID-19 vaccines had been made under the scheme, and 251 claims relating to vaccines for all other illnesses, including, I think, 15 for measles, mumps and rubella. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it would, I think, most reasonable.
Just going to bring audio up there. Just going to jump in on that particular point there, because you've heard in the debate that Andrew Brigden brought on talking about the excess deaths, and the Minister gave the response saying the government's view is that influenza makes a significant part of the causation or potential causation for the deaths. But those figures there that were just mentioned, 6,000 as opposed to 6,300 whatever, as opposed to 200 and something, I mean, that's a massive imbalance between the link that the minister's proposing, the causation that it could be influenza, not just
COVID,
as a result of the vaccination.
That's right. Well, that's what you get, because once you've had the COVID jabs, you are predisposed to get more respiratory infections. I've seen that myself, friends and others who I've known, and it's also been reported everywhere. That's because these COVID jabs and boosters alter your immunity. They push up an immunoglobulin called IgG4 while reducing an immunoglobulin called IgE. And this IgG4 rise is associated with a general dampening down of immunity and a resulting susceptibility to more infections. So getting these boosters is definitely not a good idea, because you'll get sick just from ordinary coughs and colds that everybody gets, which otherwise would only leave you with a few days of sniffles. You'll end up in bed for 2 or 3 weeks, or worse still, perhaps have to go to hospital again and again. And as I think as many people already know who've had these COVID jabs, they're getting repeated illness. Certainly many other people are not getting repeated illness, but all that's happened to them is that they've fallen for the government's narrative, and they'll just say yes when the government invents another pandemic and tries to shut us down and give us more of these toxic inoculations.
And I'll just pick my audio up a little bit then. Catherine, I have seen your comment there in relation to a screenshot of the title of the book. Because I'm living and the way that this is set up here, because I'm doing all the producing at the same time, the switching, playing of the videos and everything like that from the desk here. Probably might not be possible for me to do that whilst I'm playing this clip, but I will probably PM you. How about PM or DM you, I think they call it now, direct message. But here we go. I just wanted to pick up on that particular point there, because there is a huge disparity between between those particular figures. That there's been 232, I think it was, thereabouts, over the past couple of years for claims of injury as a result of the influenza vaccine, as opposed to 6,000. Let's call it 6,500 of the COVID deaths. So a little bit more.
reasonable people would say, well, the alarm bells should be ringing very strongly because the vaccine damage payments scheme has received almost all the claims it's had in the last 2 years have been in relation to COVID-19 and hardly any in relation to MMR, 15 as against 6,809. And yet the consequence of failing to deal adequately with those 6,809 claims is that it is actually undermining the case of vaccine confidence. And so we're seeing the consequence of that there's a lower take-up of vaccines because people don't trust the vaccines, they don't trust the government. And their lack of trust is centred around the way in which the government has responded or failed to respond to the vaccine damage which has resulted from COVID-19 vaccines. So this is a very serious issue. And I just hope that the Minister, in making her response, will be rather more forthcoming than she has been and her predecessors have been in the past, because we haven't really, Mr Deputy Speaker, got beyond the point of the government accepting that people have died or suffered serious injury as a result of the vaccines.
I'm very good. I'm sure my honourable friend's going to come on to this, and I don't want to steal his thunder. But of course, given that the authorities are now accepting that people have been damaged because these payments have been made, they wouldn't be made unless the authorities are accepting the damage has actually taken place. It also, in some cases, means that the amount of compensation that's given doesn't actually cover the costs of dealing with the disability that they've got as a consequence of it. Does my honourable friend think that, given particularly how the government coerced people into taking the COVID-19 vaccine and didn't particularly warn about the adverse reactions that may happen in some cases, does he not think that the government should cover the cost of dealing with the disabilities caused in full rather than with the arbitrary limit that's there at the moment?
Well, absolutely, and that's in essence what this bill is also calling for, because at the moment you can be put in your claim, and months or years later you get your claim resolved, and even if you are found to have suffered really serious injury, you've got a maximum of £120,000 in payment, and that covers all the consequential losses, the cost of care, maybe lifetime support which you may need as a result of those injuries. And the government says, oh, well, don't worry, because you can actually bring a civil claim in parallel. But the civil claims in parallel, which are being brought forward by some people, are being frustrated by government lawyers. And so some claims that have been made, months have gone by, and then most recently the Department of Health has said, well, you should be making your claim against AstraZeneca rather than the Department for Health. But of course, essentially there are claims against the same organisation because the government itself is the indemnifier of any liabilities that there might be on the part of the producers of these, at the time, experimental vaccines. But can I?
So yeah, just going to jump in there. That comes back to the comments that I was saying earlier. So that coming back to the importance or the significance of the bill that Senator Ralph Babber introduced to for the government to block Big Pharma from giving indemnity, because of course then the government, well, here in Australia what we actually found is the government said they gave the indemnity to Big Pharma. They didn't pick up the indemnity themselves. They said that they would have a special scheme that would enable doctors to be indemnified. And then, of course, we've now found out through the AMPS, I'm sorry.
Medical Professionals.
Yep, the Australian...
Medical Professional Society.
Yep, the Medical Professional Society, that doctors have had claims made against them at their practices because somebody has suffered an illness, and the government has come back and said, well, let's have a look at the administration of your service delivery, I guess, your, how you've delivered that medical thing expertise. And as Dawn's commenting there, then talking about informed consent. And of course, they're now holding the doctors out to dry by saying, well, you didn't give informed consent, which was very well much, sort of talked about in the Australian immunology or immunisation handbook.
That's right, they talk about. But the point is, informed consent can only work if people really are informed. Doctors are not informed. We do not learn about vaccine manufacture in medical school. They just tell us that they have this very toxic ethyl mercury they use to stop bacterial growth in vaccine cultures. It's been 250 years of this bizarre form of quackery. Many major people, like the evolutionist Alfred Russel Wallace, who in about 1900 said that vaccines were a disaster, they should be gotten rid of. It's always been something of very marginal value. If the fact that vaccine companies are given indemnities, as Ronald Reagan gave to the vaccine companies in the USA in 1986, this demonstrates that the materials they have are very, very toxic. They want to give this muck to us, but they're not willing to pay out for all the damage they cause to people in the process. And they, of course, have been trying to get control of government so that government will give them carte blanche so that they can do what they like. We have no proper regulations nationally or internationally over the behaviour of these companies that promote these vaccines towards us. And I'd like to point out that this was very largely the case even in earlier times. People would promote a new antibiotic totally different to what anyone had had in the past, and many of these antibiotics have now been withdrawn. One of these, a well-known one with streptomycin, and is now not used in human diseases. But I was given it when I was a baby, about 18 months old, for some sort of flu or whatever, and I know that it had certain effects on me later in life. So we as ordinary people are used on as experimental rats, and the fact you've got this rats test to test for COVID free and handed out everywhere is not to help us. It's only to encourage a culture of fear and acceptance.
So again, thank you very much, Dr. Mark. I did say at the head of the stream, it's a slow chat, so excuse the, I've just off camera made Dr. Mark a hot chocolate, and yeah, so that we can have this, push this stream out in a more relaxed manner and try and pick up. And one of the other points that I want to pick up that he also just said then is that the government in the UK is saying that you can run a civil claim in parallel to your claim to the government, and then they're being hindered by government lawyers, which is really, I guess, what he really means is that you've got the government coming out with well-funded, well-oiled machine to go through, and even just in disclosure and discovery process, slow down that whole process. And this is the same, this is the issue with, in my view, this is the issue with class actions, because class actions are very, very expensive to run. It takes a tremendous amount of time to do, to get them up. And you're relying on documents and discovery, and the government will say that that's not available, which will hinder your case. We can't give it because of what are they using for the COVID thing? They're saying, well, intellectual property. It's commercial.
That's right. Patents. They have patents over the various sequences of DNA, or RNA, which they've claimed. That wasn't possible till about 20 years ago, when they changed the law to patent DNA and RNA sequences.
And he does talk about that particular, he talks about a particular class action. It's coming up soon, and I'm going to jump back to it. Realistically, the ordinary person would not be able to fund a lawyer to defend a speeding ticket, notwithstanding to take on the government about a claim for compensation over something that they were coerced into taking. So, you know, you would be looking to defend a speeding ticket in the Perth law courts here, you know, north of $5,000. You know, now, I mean, that's, by today's standards, you know, that's no small amount of change. And yeah, so here we go. I'll cut back a little bit more.
Can I just quote briefly, remind ourselves of what the Prime Minister said about this when he was asked by my Right Honourable and learned friend for Kenilworth and Southern on the 22nd of March this year. My Right Honourable friend has a constituent who is actually a litigant in this because he has suffered, I think he's 4 weeks in a coma, and he's got permanent injuries as a result, and he's got carers and all the costs associated with that and loss of earnings, and £120,000 doesn't begin to get anywhere near the compensation to which it would be entitled under any normal circumstances. And so my Right Honourable friend asked the Prime Minister about the maximum payment of £120,000, that first order questions, and about the arbitrary 60% threshold. And did the Prime Minister respond to either of those points, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Sadly, he didn't. All he said, we are taking steps to reform vaccine damage payments schemes by modernising the operations and providing more timely outcomes. Well, that wasn't an answer. And of course, even that answer was hardly accurate because the outcomes are not timely. There are many, many applications which have now been waiting for over 18 months to be dealt with. There are many hundreds of applications which are still not received the medical notes. And the government, under pressure from me...
And I guess there you go, that's the point that I was just making, that government lawyers in a civil claim, you know, and it's the same aspect that you would experience with class actions, that they take months and months and months to get the information forward, which you need to continue with your case. And of course, if you look at, say, a class action here in with
mesothelioma.
Mesothelioma, asbestosis.
That's right. That's right. Connected to each other. The two ideas.
Connected there. And what you saw in relation to those is a couple of people that were the principal, opponents, or sorry, not opponents, components. Those that were the principal
litigants, the people who were
the principal litigant.
Afflicted.
Thanks, Dr. Mark. Yeah. That they drag it out in the hope that they die.
That's right, because people don't live long with either of those two diseases, especially mesothelioma.
That yeah, so there we go. That's the point that I was trying to make earlier with you know, with class actions. I did see somebody talking about the class action. I'm just going back now. Dr. Mel McCann is doing in Queensland. You know, you would be talking, I guess, a class action north of $300,000-400,000 to get up. Of course, we've seen the class action that was here in Western Australia with the principal litigant of Ben Falconer. You know, and I think that's well in excess of 700,000, 650. You know, and it's now got to the point in order to appeal, which is what the government have done, and they've drawn it out, and they've probably mounted a case that is appealable, but there's an outstanding legal bill that needs to be paid in order for it to go ahead on the appeal, and that takes money. So
many hundreds of applications which are still not received the medical notes. And the government, under pressure from me, said that they would introduce subject access requests in order to ensure that people could get the medical notes. And the subject access requests have been put forward, but not in respect of every case. a lot of those subject access requests have been outstanding for more than 3 months against the statutory limit of 1 month. So I don't think we can say the Prime Minister was correct in saying that the effective steps are being taken to modernise the operations and.
So just going to pick up a point there, Nobby Noble coming in on YouTube asking, is Australia part of the British UK Kingdom? Well, there is, our parliamentary system here in Australia is very much modelled because we are part of the Commonwealth realm, and that's not getting into the whole sovereign constitution debate, because, you know, that's the mainstream understanding that people have is that we are part of the Commonwealth realm, and our court system, our parliamentary system, being the Westminster system of law, we very much fall under that. That is why this particular debate over in the UK, and the one that Andrew Bridgeton brought on, is of very much particular relevance, because of the similarities our system's modelled on there.
That's right. We do have a few of our own things. We call the upper house the Senate, which was copying the USA, which was in turn copying ancient Rome. But basically our system is meant to be a descendant and based upon the British system.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, this stream, and rarely in the past, you know, talking about things, you know, the sovereign argument, you know, I get it, but it's not one that I think in the main, you know, that the majority perhaps will understand, hence the reason why. It's not that I want to avoid it, it's just that I simply don't. You know.
That's right. I think one of the best things to look at is the Magna Carta document that was brought about by the barons when Richard the Lionheart put his brother King John on the throne, and King John was milking England of all the money so that Richard the Lionheart could continue fighting in the Middle East. And King John, once he couldn't get the money he wanted, he couldn't get it because the barons signed this document called Magna Carta. They made 6 copies of the document. One was damaged, one was destroyed. There are 3 left. They're damaged document, and 2 others are left in England. The other 2 Magna Carta documents, one was sent to Ottawa in Canada, and the other one is in the old Parliament House in Canberra, where I saw it as a little boy.
Okay, so here we go. Some more of the UK Parliament COVID-19 compensation
provide
debate.
More timely outcomes. And so, Mr. Deputy Speaker, can I turn briefly to what is contained in this bill, but particularly linking it in with the UK COVID-19 inquiry, because as it would happen, on the 13th of September this year, Lady Harriet had the preliminary hearing for the Module 4 of the inquiry, which is going, as I said earlier, is going to take place in the July of next year. And as a result of what is going to happen is that the issue of the adequacy of the vaccine damage payment scheme is going to be the agenda for that meeting. And we've heard at the meeting legal representatives from some of the groups of people who have suffered vaccine damage spoke. And Ms. Morris was their counsel, and she said that the primary causes of the injuries and deaths are vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia, or VITT, vaccine-induced vasculitis.
Knocked a cable there, so just bear with me while I get that back up. We should be.
Stroke, cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, and Guillain-Barré syndrome. She said survivors are having to cope with the after effects of their injuries, including brain damage and physical disablement, whilst the bereaved are struggling to live without their partners, children or parents. All members of the Vaccine Injured and Bereaved UK members have a confirmation that their injuries were caused by COVID-19 vaccines. And so that is going to be an issue which is going to be debated at the inquiry next year. But Ms. Morris, Casey, also goes on to say, in addition to their injury and bereavement, those we represent have also experienced a second trauma, a lack of medical knowledge and understanding about the risk and presentation of vaccine injury has left injured people undiagnosed and without treatment. Furthermore, the prevailing institutional mindset within medical bodies and the government has been fixated solely on acknowledging the benefits of the vaccine. This has led to those reporting vaccine injury to feel disbelieved, unheard, and marginalised. And she goes on to say, censorship is a very real issue, my lady, for the vaccine injured and the bereaved. Their support groups have been shut down by social media platforms and their experiences censored by the mainstream media. They have to speak in code online for fear of having their only source of support taken away from them. They face stigma and abuse for sharing their symptoms in the context of the COVID vaccine, and even have been branded as anti-vax for sharing very real and medically proven vaccine injuries. And she goes on to say that in August of last year, the UK CD family lost its first member to suicide, and a survey of their members showed that 73% had considered suicide. And so these issues are
Okay, just bringing the audio back up there just to come in. And I guess this, Dr. Mark, is something else that we have very much experienced here in Australia. We've seen the persecution of mainstream media, of what they've done for those that chose body autonomy. And to some extent, and I guess the one that comes to mind for me, I guess the censorship of those that have been very much genuinely injured by the COVID-19 vaccination would be a stream that I did when there was 5,000-6,000 people in WA Parliament, and a person who was jab injured started explaining what had happened. And you know, they killed the stream. They did all those sort of things. So you know, that is it. And then I guess the community of social media has also come under attack, where people were able to have discussions amongst themselves, even in private groups. We're still finding that admins of those private groups were being hit with notices of breaches of community standards by the likes of Facebook and YouTube, and you've seen the unfortunate rise in suicide.
That's right. At least 4 doctors I've heard of have committed suicide, but it may be a lot higher. That's in Western Australia. So that,
yeah. So and you're talking about. I mean, he's saying when you have the police come to your place for doing nothing. I mean, whether that's a comment or something that relates to yourself. I don't know the background and that. But when you start seeing persecutions of saying, this is the government telling you, when you see your neighbour going out to collect the mail, don't wave to them, don't stop and talk to them, because the airborne transmission of COVID-19 is going to place them or you at risk. These are the sort of things that happened. I mean, the South Australian Health Minister who said, of course, COVID was such that we could stop you going down to the pub, but if you went to a large game of football, that was okay. but if the ball came into the crowd, don't touch it. I mean, you know, there was images of, players bumping into goalposts and they're frantically behind the scenes wiping it down, you know, in between play. I mean, this is the sort of persecution that we've seen. Of course, we now know that a lot of the stuff that was branded as pie in the sky conspiracy theory, has now been proven to be more correct than not.
That's right. I think one of the good things that's happened that the first time I came in contact with lockdowns is that when they declared it in New South Wales, it happened to be the very day my mother died. She was 98 and she was aware that something was funny from all the radio about the talk about this mysterious COVID infection. So when I went to Sydney, went to the funeral, I got back the day before they shut down New South Wales entirely. I couldn't have got out the following day, and the police came round to my house the first day to make sure I was in 14 days of quarantine, having come back from New South Wales. I had plenty of food at home, and so I had no problems, and they didn't come around any of the later 13 days. But it shows the pressure that had been put on police and the fear factor, because the police were unfamiliar with how severe the disease was, but they soon woke up.
So I'm just going to cut back just a little bit more of this debate here. I might actually fast forward because there's a couple of other parts that I want to bring you. We didn't sort of really set a time limit, but we are nearing 2 hours. It is a slow chat. That's how they go. So let me just find out.
Are going to be debated at the COVID inquiry. But why is the government not doing something more actively now? I give way to my friend.
I'm very grateful to him, and he's making, as ever, a very powerful case. I just wondered whether he had any indication whether the COVID inquiry or even his bill, because it wasn't entirely clear from my reading of it, and perhaps he'll correct me, whether or not he thought that any changes should be made retrospectively, so that people whose cases had already been considered, either on the disability threshold or on the maximum compensation, whether those cases should be revisited in the event of any changes being made.
So I think I will just fast forward on.
I think my
clear too. I raise this because I've been rather alarmed to hear of a clinical trial for a Moderna mRNA.
Okay, I'm going to just stop on this point here because I just want to just bring Dr. Mark's mic in on this, which I think I have, and I'm just going to back it up a little bit because this is quite interesting. Again, this was Friday just gone in the UK. Have a listen to this.
Is very low, which I'm sure the Minister will reiterate again today. But of course, the chances of somebody of that age suffering a serious illness from COVID is very low.
Back it up a little bit more.
People can read important safety information. It does not reflect badly on them, it reflects badly on us. In black and white on the Pfizer website, you can read important safety information concerning their Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. Myocarditis and pericarditis has occurred in some people who have received that product, most commonly in adolescent males aged between 12 and 17. They go on to say that the chance of this occurring is very low, which I'm sure the Minister will reiterate again today. But of course, the chances of somebody of that age suffering a serious illness from COVID is very low as well. The Minister might not be so keen to point that out, and Pfizer don't seem to point that out on their website, but we should make that clear too. I raise this because I've been rather alarmed to hear of a clinical trial for a Moderna mRNA COVID vaccine, which I hope the Minister will respond to in her remarks, involving healthy children aged 12 and up. This is not something in the past during the pandemic. This is something that's happening now. It has been approved by the MHRA and involves the Bradford Patient Recruitment Centre, which is on the edge of my constituency, so some of my constituents could potentially be involved. I wrote to the Health Research Authority in August to ask what ethical rationale there is for the inclusion of healthy children in this trial. Because of course it's known, and it has been for a long time, that healthy children are at a vanishingly small risk from COVID-19. They were at the height of the pandemic, they certainly are now. And so far I have not yet received a coherent answer to that simple question. But it's come to my attention that the centre has been recruiting children for this trial using advertisements which have not been ethically approved as required by UK rules. Children can only be recruited to a clinical trial if they as an individual have some reasonable expectation of significant benefit when balanced with the risks associated with their participation. Any potential benefits for adults that may flow from this is not good enough and does not trump that principle. So what is going on here, given that we quite clearly know that there cannot be expectation of significant benefits to a cohort of people who are not actually having significant risk? Why are these decisions being made? And it comes back to where I started at the start of my speech, that the authorities seem completely unable and in some cases unwilling to protect people, in this case children, from potential harm. The cost-benefit analysis, if it has been done, I'm not even sure it has been done, but if it has been done, it certainly doesn't appear to stack up.
So I guess, Dr. Mark, I mean, what he's saying there, that the authorities are unable or not willing to do that. What would you say if I put the proposition that the authorities, I mean, if they start adopting or blocking clinical trials of that nature now, that's an admission in its own right.
That's right. They shouldn't be conducting clinical trials on adolescents for this vaccine because the adolescents don't die of flu. There's no reason to do this, and if I had to think of a reason, what I would think is that they're doing like they did with all of us before. We found that there were different batches for one particular type of injection. Then good people in WA worked out that only people from a few batches had disease and the rest of the people had minimal side effects, except say a sore arm, etc. And what I conclude from that is that the different batches contain different concoctions of various substances, some with more E. coli in the mixture, some with graphene oxide or whatever, and they were testing people to see which ones are going to cause the most damage early on.
That would be a whole different conversation.
That's right. That's right.
And probably one, again, just mindful of the fact we don't want this stream to be killed because there is even saying we don't want the stream to be using the K word is enough for the algorithm to kind of go, don't like that. But I guess the point I'm making is the government really do have themselves in a corner.
They are.
Both in the UK and in Australia. So they can't not come out and stop clinical trials like that, because if they do it for that, then they'll go, well, it validates everything that they're saying today as opposed to what they were trying to raise earlier. So it really
That's right. They're going against their own narrative.
Yeah.
And I think I could perhaps point out something even more extraordinary. An experiment that was carried on when I was in high school. It was called Mouse Universe 25. I'd never heard of it before. I've found it on a Better Bachelor stream, a very clever American streaming service, but they mentioned this business called Mouse Universe 25. This person called Calhoun made a very, very large area in which mice, laboratory white mice, could live happily. And they started with 4 pairs of mice, and eventually they bred up into thousands of mice. The area was clean, so they always had plenty of food and they didn't have waste building up everywhere. Yet after a couple of years, when they started to build up to great numbers, the mice started to behave differently. The females would disappear into corners, the males would either fight with each other or learn to get on with each other. And then when they sampled mice later on, they found that these mice were incapable of breeding, and thus these mice were essentially extinct by 1973 because the behaviours they'd learnt as as infant mice, etc., prevented them from reproducing. I mean, the mother mice would often attack the young pups so that they would grow up fearful and suppressed, and so that normal male and female behaviours couldn't occur. So I suspect that now this 2025 is coming up, I think somebody seems to have this Mouse Universe 25 in mind, because they are getting us to take these rats tests, and if you feel like an experimental rat, you really are, especially what we're hearing now on British television.
And I guess just to calm the farm a little bit there with Nobby Noble there, you know, asking about your qualifications. So not a home taught doctor, of course, a university educated and with real clinical experience. Of course, Dr. Mark Lofts, now retired, is able to and has done from the very beginning of the pandemic here in Perth, Western Australia, was speaking out, and I've done many streams of Dr. Mark, simply because he doesn't have the fear that that he can be deregistered.
That's right. I worked in immunology and got to see what it was like, and it was the most depressing experience in my life.
So there we go. Hopefully that saves your keyboard a little bit of grief there, Nobby. That yeah, Dr. Mark is as real as a medical doctor as you can get. So just moving on, I'm going to cut back to this debate. I'm going to just fast forward a little bit, because there's a couple of I want to bring you one part of the debate that talks about the words safe and effective. So that is, I think, is of importance. I'm just going to try and fast forward to find that. I don't think we're too far away.
Yeah, when I hear the term safe and effective, I just don't believe it made by the government now. It reminds me of those advertisements that were on TV about 25 years ago, trying to get people to invest in safe investments called Nice and Safe. They had a lot of cartoon animals, hippopotamuses and giraffes, telling people nice and safe. The poor mums and dads put their money into the scheme. It was a complete Ponzi scheme, and they lost the lot. But the people had the money, the people who caused it had the money to put all these ads on TV, just like the government does now with COVID.
So just say, obviously, you're probably going to be due for a new keyboard there, Nobby, if you keep going with that. Never trust a professor from any university. Yeah, I mean, of course, there would be some that have been trying to speak out but have simply been silenced. Cancel culture is alive and well. We've seen it more recently. But I'm up to speed. I've found where it is. So slave, it's effective. Love that one there, Russell. So here we go.
Speaker, I too want to thank my honourable friend for Christchurch for bringing this bill here today, for the work that's gone into that, for the research that has gone into that, for the people he's reached out and spoken to about that. And at the tail end of his speech, he talked about the phrase safe and effective, and I'd like to pick up on that phrase and start my speech from there. A phrase, safe and effective, that became the COVID vaccine catchphrase, we'll call it that was repeated so many times over the last couple of years, it cropped up everywhere, in government communications, in interviews with experts, and across a media too, only too happy to run with that COVID slogan, safe and effective. So ingrained did that become in the national psyche that to ever then ask questions about the COVID vaccine became very difficult to do indeed. And asking questions is a vital part of scientific and indeed political debate. However, when discussing COVID, we no longer appeared to be dealing with science. Oh no, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but rather the science. And to question the science was to risk being called and labelled a COVIDiot, or that most poisonous.
I love it there, just jump in there, a COVIDiot. Of course, Dr. Mark, you've been known to come up with a few good ones, the quaxine,
Well, that's right. That's what we've got now. The AMA is now in danger because as children get sick and parents get very angry, people will start physically assaulting doctors for injuring their children. And as I said, it won't be the Australian Medical Association anymore. It will be QLM, Quack Lives Matter. They'll be trying to protect themselves from angry patients, angry victims of their abuse, because they're accepting the lies that governments tell them.
Of terms, anti-vaxxer. People who just wanted to query this new vaccine were closed down and were vilified. So I looked up the definition of anti-vaxxer and was surprised to learn that it is someone who opposes the use of some or all vaccines, regulations mandating vaccination, or usually both. And there were 246 of us in this House who, on the 13th of July 2021, voted against mandating the vaccines for care workers. That's 246 anti-vaxxers in this House, according to the latest definition. And that's absolute nonsense. People weren't anti-vaxxers. Other people have been now concerned that other vaccines families are losing faith in because of the way they were treated due to the COVID-19 vaccines. We've seen there has been a drop in the MMR vaccine. We've seen there has been a drop in the polio vaccine, which is wrong. People do need to take those vaccines. But all people in this House wanted to do was question this new vaccine, to have a debate on it, particularly when this House was wanting to mandate it on people and on care workers. So my point is this: if we allow language to be corrupted in this way and definitions of words to be bent out of shape, then we lack the tools for nuanced debate. And it is only by having a wide and open debate that we get to the central gravity of truth. I don't think we've had anything like a wide and open debate on the topic of the COVID-19 vaccines, about their safety and their efficacy. And I come back to the word safe, free from harm or risk of any kind, a word with an absolute definition, not to be qualified or diminished. And yet we know that the COVID-19 vaccines, like all medical...
That look there, as we're both leaning forward, that's in relation to the comment. I mean, you know, we can't sort of say it anymore. Nobby, many other streams that you can comment on, and I guess, as we say in Australia, take a chill pill. That's what you need to do. You know, that yeah, there'd be you know, there'd be many doctors that should be speaking out, aren't, and you're attacking somebody that's been consistent from day one. But we'll move along. You hopefully you're having a good afternoon.
Interventions are not 100% free from risk or danger, and that's why the Blue Guide, a document published by the MHRA, which gives detailed guidance on the legislation controlling how medicines are advertised in the UK, says this: advertising which states or implies that a product is safe is unacceptable. All medicines have the potential for side effects, and no medicine is completely risk-free, as individual patients respond differently to treatment. This principle is also replicated within the UK pharmaceutical industry's own self-regulatory code of practice, which also states the word safe must not be used without qualification. On that basis, and worryingly, both Pfizer and AstraZeneca are guilty, by their own industry's self-regulatory code, of breaking their own best practice. They were found to have misled the public, both by misrepresenting and overstating the efficacy of the COVID vaccines and erroneously describing them as safe in press releases and on social media without qualification. How many other organisations and individuals are also guilty of misleading the public in this way? We were told that AstraZeneca vaccines was perfectly safe. That word again, and there was no evidence of blood clots. But the advice was changed on the 7th of April 2021 so that those under the age of 30 years old should be offered an alternative brand due to the now proven link with blood clots. And then the advice changed again so that under 40s should be offered an alternative brand. A safety signal was picked up and acted upon, thank goodness. But in Denmark, the problem was picked up much sooner. They paused the use of AstraZeneca on the 11th of March 2021 after they had vaccinated 734,000 people. At the same time, 24 million people had been vaccinated in the UK without the MHRA detecting a signal of a problem. Why were we so far behind the curve? Was it because debate had been closed down? Was it because people were not allowed to even question what was going on? And what about mRNA vaccines? In Florida last year, the state Surgeon General recommended against males aged between 18 and 39 from receiving mRNA COVID-19 vaccines of any brand. My question is, what evidence was Florida reacting to? And is the MHRA urgently looking into whether we should be following suit here? In July 2020, the government published the first Do No Harm report. It highlighted significant problems and stated that the MHRA needs substantial revision, particularly in relation to adverse event reporting and medical device regulation. It needs to ensure that it engages more with patients and their outcomes. The spontaneous reporting platform for medicines and devices, the yellow card system, needs reform. The system is not good enough at spotting trends in practice and outcomes that give rise to safety concerns. What has been done since that report was published just over 2 years ago? Have these concerns been heard and acted upon? Dame June Rain, the head of the MHRA, recently said that the COVID pandemic has catalysed the transformation of the regulator from watchdog to an enabler, which doesn't exactly sound like good news for anyone concerned about safety. Ultimately, it comes down to this. The government repeatedly told the public that COVID vaccines were safe. And for many, probably the vast majority, they were. But plenty of people have suffered as a result of their decision to follow the government advice and take this new medical intervention. Some have tragically lost their lives, and as was noted last month at the COVID inquiry by Anna Morris KC, victims and their families have been marginalised and face stigma and abuse for sharing their symptoms and have been branded anti-vax for sharing very real and medically proven vaccine injuries. This is really quite unacceptable. It is way past time that the government does the right thing and follows the recommendations of my honourable friend from Christchurch. It has been shocking to hear how slowly the vaccine damage payment scheme has been operating. Applicants having to wait months. We heard too from the Solicitor Peter Todd at a recent hearing of our APPG on pandemic response and recovery. He described how 113...
Yeah, I guess it is happy hour. A comment on Facebook for one particular person on commenting on YouTube. And good question there, Jared. You know, to set out exactly what it is that Nobby, what it is that you don't agree that Dr. Mark Watts has said. But so thank you for that. And yeah, Victoria Road Brewery. Obviously, that's you've got to drop behind that, and yeah, it's certainly beer o'clock here, and perhaps maybe Nobby Knob has had a few too many over there.
9 applications had been waiting, or applicants have been waiting for more than 18 months for a decision on their case. This is excessively long, especially when people are injured and potentially unable to work. We were also told that 162 claims were found to have had disablement caused by vaccine, but it was judged that they were just not disabled enough to merit a financial reward. And in many of those cases, the decision was reached without a doctor meeting or even speaking with the applicant to help with the assessment. And in the rare cases that there have been awarded money, well, that payment hasn't changed, as my honourable friend for Christchurch said, since 2007. So its value has been eroded by inflation, and it simply just isn't good enough. And so, in conclusion, I'll make a plea for transparency and integrity. It's time to be honest with the public about the safety of these vaccines, and we must start by giving them access to information and data without further delay. And we must also, as an urgent priority, look after those who have been damaged or those who have tragically lost loved ones. We may then begin to restore faith that has undoubtedly been lost in the authorities responsible for protecting and promoting public health. There are many unanswered questions, and the repetition from ministers of those three words, safe and effective, for all the reasons I have just given, is simply not good enough an answer, and I'm delighted to be supporting my honourable friend from Christchurch bill today.
Opposition from bench.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to congratulate.
So here you're just about to hear and that's another picture just showing you how empty the chamber is. The House of Commons, 650 members are currently sit in the UK House of Commons, and quite a dismal turnout. But here is, and we won't be far from ending the stream, but this is the Minister for Health giving her response. Let's have a listen to this.
Congratulate the Honourable Member for Christchurch for securing the second reading of this bill. I also want to take the opportunity to thank...
Actually, I'm just going to cut back here and just say, so we've just heard a debate talking about the use of safe and effective. So how many times does she say it? Let's have a listen.
Yeah, I think it's about 7 or 8 times at least.
The Honourable Member for Tatton and the Honourable Member for Shipley for participating in their debate. I've listened very extensively to the things that they've raised. I thought it'd be helpful for me to begin by setting out Labour's position on this matter. We believe that the COVID-19 vaccine is safe and effective. It has saved countless lives, not only in Britain, but across the globe. Over the course of the pandemic, over 30,000 people across the UK have died with COVID-19. Therefore, it's important we do not understate that getting the vaccination has been and continues to be the single most effective way to reduce death and severe illness from COVID-19. Members from across the House will be aware that all vaccines go through extensive and ongoing testing procedures. The COVID-19 vaccines went through multiple stages of clinical trials before being approved. The vaccine has met strict independent standards for safety, quality and effectiveness. I won't be given...
Order, one moment. It is entirely up to the Honourable Lady whether she gives way or not. But members should not walk into the chamber 3/4 of the way through a debate and then seek to intervene.
I think it's important for me to set out what Labour's position is on this particular matter. Without the vaccine and the extraordinary work of scientists, volunteers and the NHS staff, we wouldn't have been able to end the lockdowns and return to our daily lives, and I'm sure we all agree on this. Therefore, the Shadow Health and Social Care team remain extraordinarily grateful to all those who have worked so hard to build and roll out these vaccines across the UK. However, while the COVID-19 vaccination programme has been hugely successful, there have been some extremely rare cases of people sadly suffering side effects and deteriorating health with a possible link to COVID-19 vaccines. Whilst serious adverse events are rare compared to a number of doses administered, when they do occur, they can have unexpected and life-changing implications. It is therefore right our healthcare system and this government do all they can to improve the diagnosis and treatment of those who have suffered from this. The Yellow Card scheme already collects and monitors information on suspected safety concerns, and there are a dedicated team of scientists that review the information to monitor the vaccine rollout, and I'll encourage everyone to keep using that scheme to make sure that they can collect the information. Where vaccine damage does tragically occur, it is right that individuals and families can access the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme, VDPS. However, it's important that this scheme is fit for purpose, and it's important that the government acts to make it happen. And there have been reports of operational delays within the vaccine damage payment schemes. The report suggests that hundreds have been waiting.
Just on the comment there that she sounds like mainstream media, that said by the hang loose recluse. Good afternoon, Nico. So you can, I guess, to just pick up on that comment there, you can start to see how the narrative, who sets the narrative? The government sets it to the media, and then it's rolled out en masse, via TVs to the public, and that's the problem. That's a big part of the problem.
They all speak with one voice, and they're all pro-vax.
And there's been many videos that have come out highlighting a number of left-leaning media organisations all over the world, including those here in Australia, where you change the channel, it's the same script. Change the channel, same script. Change the channel. And of course, this member that you have here, the health minister there, she she would have been handed this by the party room whip, who would have said, go and read this. So that's essentially, how democracy has been operating, far from how it should be operating, but how it has been operating. So it is painful to listen to the response. But we'll just go with a
over
bit
12
more.
months for an outcome, with some waiting more than 18 months. In fact, following a question about the VDPS earlier this year, the Prime Minister vowed to improve this scheme. So I'll be interested to hear from the Minister about the government's response to tackling these delays. Can the Minister confirm if they believe the scheme is fit for purpose and if they're planning to update it? And can the government assure us that the NHS Business Services Authority has the capacity to process applications to the VDPS in a timely manner? Can I also urge ministers to meet and engage with infected individuals and families to look at ways to improve diagnosis, treatment, and how to claim under the VDPS can be addressed?
Back to there. So she's encouraging ministers to meet with family that have been impacted by the COVID vaccine. But which again, she's talking through the side of her mouth, because you can see in Parliament there of 650 members that could be listening to this debate, engaging, if nothing else, to hear, but be present, and they're not.
That's right. They're just accepting the British Labour Party story is peddled by her, and that goes for the Conservatives too. There's no debate, that's the point. That's why she's speaking to an empty chamber. The others don't need to be there because they know what she's going to say, and they're all just a bunch of nodding donkeys, which they don't want you to see in Parliament. I think even Banksy's Parliament looked a bit fuller of things than the present one.
Yeah, so nodding donkeys. And, so the question then would be, you would wonder how many people in particular, I'm not sure if they have them electorates like they do here in Australia, would be in fact writing to their members to talk and seek meetings with them, and then being turned back. So she's saying, because that's what people have experienced.
That's right,
here.
they do. Yeah.
They've been wanting to get meetings with their MPs. You used to be able to go into the office or ring up and and they won't even take a phone call now. You're just simply told, email your question in. You get the automated response. You know, we're inundated with.
That's right. Thank you for calling us. We'll call you at some future date.
Yeah. And of course that call never happens. So here we go. Just a bit more of this painful response.
Must we?
More quickly. I mean, I will give way on this occasion, but you have spoken extensively.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. So does the Labour Party believe that the vaccine damage payment scheme is fit for purpose, or does it not believe it's fit for purpose?
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for raising this. As I've said, I've asked the Minister to be able to look at meet with members of the families that are directly affected to see whether the ways to improve the scheme and to see how it could be addressed more quickly.
So this is again where you've just heard, even she acknowledged it, you know, that it's taken, some people have claims for 18 months outstanding.
Yeah.
So, you know, you could imagine you'd probably find that these people that are impacted would get a meeting and they go in there with 18 months of internal
damage and more history. That's
yeah,
right.
and they're very, very, you know, they're emotive, they're inflamed, and then their meeting gets cancelled because the person, well, you know, they're confrontational and they're deemed aggressive.
That's right.
Because they've been kicked in the guts constantly over 18 months. So yeah, I think
that's the best step forward. We do need to listen to individuals to see what tailored support and where it needs to be improved. Finally, I want to say it would be remiss of me if I didn't join colleagues in calling out the scourge of vaccine misinformation. Getting a vaccine is so important, especially for those who are most vulnerable. We must make sure that all vaccine misinformation is being debunked and that the most important message is that the vaccine is safe and effective is being shared. And I hope the Minister will echo my remarks on the danger of misinformation. Getting a vaccination is too important for the health of this nation and indeed the health of this world to be playing the fast and loose with the facts. While the opposition doesn't support the bill today, we do hope that the government will tackle these issues that I and honourable members have mentioned and address where the further action is required. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Before starting, can I congratulate the Honourable Member for Christchurch for securing second reading of this bill. It is an important issue to debate, and can I also thank him for the tone in which he's conducted this debate and his sentiments at the very start to say this isn't about being anti-vaccination. As the Right Honourable Member for Tatton also indicated, vaccination is a crucial part of our armour in terms of dealing with disease across the world. Now, this bill is specifically around COVID vaccination, but just to start...
Now, well, the Minister here takes an interjection, and I'll just cut back here. I just can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she does pick up on the use of safe and effective. So we'll just get to that point, and then we'll probably just reassess where we're at in terms of this slow chat.
By advocating, as the Shadow Minister did, that vaccinations overall, after clean water, are the most effective public health intervention in the world for saving lives and promoting.
And I think I'm just going to jump in here, pick up on the comment that Dawn, that you can see up on your screen now, that Dawn has just made, that she's picking up on the mis and disinformation. Of course, having just gone through the referendum here in Australia, I mean, that was before the referendum, sometime leading up to the referendum, sometime before they actually introduced the bill, and it just seemed to be, you know, a timely coincidence that the term mis and disinformation it came out because it's convenient for the government to put, you know, hang their hat on that that's exactly what we're experiencing.
That's
of
right.
course, we've seen, you know, a tremendous amount of the mis and disinformation that's come from the government here in Australia. That's been disinformation on their part. And if you pick up on The Voice, you could look at just one small thing which got a lot of media attention, and that was the Uluru Statement of the Heart.
Yeah.
How many exact pages was it? Well, you know, it could be one, as the Prime Minister says, anywhere up to 26. I think they even said the full document is like 400.
57, yeah, even longer, with the addendums.
With all the addendums attached to it. But anything outside one was brandished misinformation. And this, you know, you can see the rollout of this terminology and the agenda that that left-leaning governments are seeking to do, which is we won't be able to have streams like this.
That's right.
If a bill like that gets up.
That's right. We'll end up like Canada, where they're cutting out internet services. So all you ever hear is what the Canadian government and like-minded people and media across the world teach. All alternative media is being suppressed there.
So, and I guess, you know, you're only from Canada, only one step away from China.
That's right. Well, I don't know if China's as locked down as Canada is, but Canada, I mean, the Western world is crumbling. Everything's been locked down entirely now. I know we hear a lot of stories about China, but I also hear from others that it's not true. So I can't speak on China. I hear different claims all the time.
In good health. The flu vaccination, which is being rolled out as we speak, will enable many people to have to be healthy over this winter and avoid hospital.
So here's, I mean, you know, not it's a big job that you've just heard in terms of the debate there, but she's standing up here. This bill is about the COVID-19 compensation, about amending the compensation. So now the Australian Parliament, which isn't anywhere near as civil as what you've just seen transpire over the last couple of hours, but you would think that somebody should be getting on their feet and going, hang on a minute, I'm raising an objection to relevance, because we're not talking about the influenza vaccine. We're talking specifically about the COVID-19 compensation bill. So that I just think that there's a particularly long leash. Maybe that's the way that they do their politics, but a long leash that has been given right there.
Yeah.
Admission, the HPV vaccination for preventing cervical cancer, which is rolled out to young girls and boys in our schools, has the potential, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to eradicate cervical cancer.
And nobody's really questioning that.
That's right. I mean, you don't eradicate cervical cancer that way. I mean, you do have to take regular smears, etc. But they found that Candida albicans, the common infection that so many women have, predisposes to that and acts to nurture it. So the whole understanding of cervical cancer is not correct. There's new research being done, but the problem is the big pharmaceuticals have taken over research, and they want to direct it, put it into a direction that you have to take more medications and more jabs. They're making money out of us, and the eventual result will be a slow genocide of people, because we have children so injured that many people become afraid of ever wanting to have children again. It's creating a mindset of degeneration, unhappiness and decay for all mankind.
And I think, you know, the other point I'm looking to expand on there as well is, in the debate, nobody's questioning that there's an issue with those that may have received a vaccination for cervical cancer and had an adverse reaction and sought to make a claim, and it's been held up. That hasn't you know, come up at all. It's the government that's leading this.
That's right. The government's making empty promises that they're going to compensate people, but there's no guarantee
in the future. So we must remember that vaccination has a powerful role to play in the health of our nation. And globally, we have one of the best immunisation programmes around the world, and it's important to pay tribute.
Yeah, as Jerry's just saying there, that, you know, this has caused many people refusing all types of other similar, you know, and that has been discussed, and that is a problem.
Well, I have to agree there that other vaccines must now be regarded as polluted by the same muck that's been put in the COVID vaccines. So I have to warn people about all vaccines. The only ones that might be safe are ones for rabies and for mosquito-borne diseases like yellow fever. They're about the only ones you'd accept now.
To all those staff who take part in vaccination programmes and make them such a success. Now, just turning to the COVID vaccination in particular, the UK was at the forefront of tackling COVID-19 through
which the whole debate is about.
the vaccination programme. It was the first healthcare system in the world to deliver COVID vaccination outside of clinical trials, and we should be proud of that. And as the Shadow Minister said, it was one of the reasons we were able to lift restrictions as one of the first countries to do so because of our success in COVID vaccination. And to turn to the point made by the Honourable Member for Shipley, I'm very happy to go on record and say that while COVID vaccines have saved tens of thousands of lives, unfortunately there have been extremely rare circumstances where individuals have very sadly experienced harm and difficult circumstances following a COVID vaccination, and these...
It's probably the closest we've come to an admission. I'm just going to fast forward because it really is just a lot of waffle.
That's right, it's just pushing the government narrative, all of it wrong.
With him after this debate today. I will give way.
That goes back to the point I mentioned before from the MHRA moving from watchdog to enabler. And I would like that again looked at, the role of this watchdog.
I hear that loud and clear from the Right Honourable Lady, and just to say that the way you, for a clinical trial, the way you advertise and recruit to that trial, any posters usually, I mean, I haven't done this for a couple of years now, but usually you would have to submit a poster to the MHRA for approval, and it's important to know if that has actually happened in this space. So we can certainly look at that after the debate today. So just to close, Madam Deputy Speaker, you know, the Honourable Gentleman has made some really good points, and they're very valid points around the safety of vaccine and encouraging people to come forward. We want people to come forward if they feel that they have had side effects from the vaccine. It helps build up the profile and enables better decision making for the future. But also his points around the vaccine damage payment scheme. We recognise that it was taking too long. That's why we moved it from DWP to the NHS. We recognise that there was multiple requests for access to patients' notes. It's why we brought in the subject access request forms. And we want to make sure that those who have, in rare occasions, experienced side effects are able to access the scheme. Unfortunately, we can't support the bill at this time because our focus must remain on improving the operation of the scheme and continuing to process claims as quickly as possible. But I very much welcome the debate today.
With the leave of the House, Sir Christopher Cho.
Madam Deputy Speaker.
So there we go. So that's a bit of what transpired before Andrew Bridgen's debate there. Probably I'm just going to try and pick up on a few of the comments. We've been going for over 2.5 hours now. It was a slow chat, and I guess I'll just allow for time to filter through. I apologise those watching on Rumble. I know we are streaming there, but I'm not able to monitor the comments because of the way that I've had to set it up today. So if any comments, I'll give 5 minutes maybe for some questions to come through. Open the floor up for both YouTube and Facebook. Anybody is free to pop a comment up there and I'll pick out one to put to Dr. Mark. Anybody, I guess, except for Nobby Noble, who is not happy because Dr. Mark is not a real doctor. Probably the one I'm going to go with first is Jared on YouTube is commenting that we can see there, Dr. Mark, that he's saying that doctors in Australia were paid to administer the shots, and very profitable for them to promote, you know, this. And you've mentioned this. This isn't, you know, so.
Okay.
Just to fill the blanks in for
As
Jared.
far as I understood, a doctor in independent practice was paid $80 a pop. If he had a clientele of about 800, 1,000 patients, and he got them all to take the regular jabs, which are going to be every 3 months, he'd make over $250,000 tax-free at the end of the year. I mean, that was an enormous incentive for doctors to go into it, while they wouldn't have made as much money as that. Many doctors, because of various overheads, I don't want to say they are, not so much yachts, but I'm thinking paying the ex or having to pay for a mistress, apart from paying a mortgage and paying for their children's education, for the more honest ones, they just felt an enormous attraction to getting this stuff. And so they've ended up being corrupted because their critical faculties are missing. But the worst thing is that these various computer things they go on, these up-to-date, which advises doctors on up-to-date practices in medicine. These up-to-date digests of medical journals, the up-to-date digests are written by people who are paid by organisations like Big Pharma, so they will have an immediate bias and slant in what the doctors read. So the doctors are getting conned by these websites that provide the so-called up-to-date information, because they're getting digests. They're not looking at the primary research itself, because there's so much research around today. But things are much worse than that. As Marcia Angell from the New England Journal of Medicine said back in the mid-1990s, that 50% of all medical articles published in journals now were not worth the paper they were printed on. That's what, over 25 years now, over 25 years have passed. Now I wonder if even 10% of them are worth it. It was like the article in the New England Journal of Medicine telling women to get the jab even if they were pregnant, despite the fact that the evidence pointed to 90% of women either having a miscarriage or that the child would be born with some sort of severe defect. I mean, the population has basically been gaslighted and told to get the jab when there's no real problem at all. The COVID was just an ordinary flu, and even though they tried to modify it by putting in genes from, well, either what they said was AIDS or from Marburg or Ebola or from the prion diseases, even if that was done, it didn't have much of an effect. It seems like certain COVID from New York and Italy may have been more infectious, but it died out in the general population, and all the COVID was a flu. And everything has been misrepresented. We've been lied to for years, and we're now under threat that this rubbish will get into the medical journals and is being taught to medical students to this day.
So, Dr. Mark, I'm just going to pick up on another comment there that's come in from Dawn. She's talking about, and thank you for Victoria Road Brewery for saying that there's no comments on Rumble. I know there's the viewers on there, but thank you very much for that. Dawn, she commented that your comments are coming through quite thick in front of the monitor in front of us. Can you help her? She's saying she's having problems understanding how doctors now know, yet they're still not speaking out.
That's right. Yeah. As far as I can tell, most doctors are afraid. They realise they're causing damage to their patients. They've heard too much about it. I think they try to rationalise themselves by saying, oh, the next patient I give, the average person, they'll be all right. But mostly the doctors are self-censoring because they're fearful of the government, or many of them are just pushing the issue aside, saying, look, we don't administer the vaccines here. So doctors are very much in a double bind, and they're caught by whoever they listen to last. But a doctor who's had a patient with severe injuries will start to think for themselves, and because they don't want to be deregistered, they'll usually try to brush the problem aside. I have a relative in Melbourne, and her grandchild was taken along for vaccination, and luckily the paediatrician there was very intelligent and said that this little 3-year-old boy doesn't need the vaccination, so he's okay for the moment. But whether this paediatrician will eventually be struck off or suspended by the medical board, APRA, it's yet hard to say.
So the fear, I guess, doctors, still have. I mean, we know the AMA released a statement saying if doctors didn't follow the narrative, that they would come under scrutiny. Whether that's perhaps live and well. We're going to try and go rapid fire as best we can, pick up as many as we can. Antoinette on Facebook, thanks Anton for watching the stream. You know, he's talking about more people have now died from the adverse reactions. Now, I mean, I guess in Western Australia or Australia, there's not enough data to actually, that the government are revealing to suggest that that in fact is the case. Having said that, what we do know is across Australia, as we've heard with Andrew Bridgeton's excess deaths, WA hit 21% excess deaths, and that was published about 4 or 5 months ago, and that in itself was data that the government promised to publish back in 2021, but they held until February, I think, this year in releasing that data.
And even then, we can't trust that data fully. They'll try to milk it and remove the excess deaths by classifying them in various ways to avoid the problem, or trying to attribute it to some other unknown condition. Because that's what's going to happen. Since we faked medicine by making the claim of a terrible COVID disease, they'll start faking the autoimmune diseases that people get as a result, and they'll try to claim there's something else and give inappropriate treatment.
So hopefully, just saying, I'm not sure if it's my mic or Dr. Mark's mic in relation to that. Just trying to double back on some of the comments here. And I guess what you're seeing there on YouTube from MS, and you know, this I mean, I've had many comments like this coming through, and that is going to the doctor, and then doctors actually laughing and mocking at people that you know, because they've gone in to do the right thing. Even those going in to do the right thing. Thank you for on the audio. So just trying to see. I guess your comments coming through now, just telling us about the audio. If we've got any more questions that you might want to put forward.
Someone asked about autoimmune disease, wanted me to discuss that a bit more.
Yep.
So I'll mention I studied immunology back in 1986, and I noticed that people, of course, were getting more vaccines. I also noticed that autoimmune disease was becoming rampant. I didn't bring in autism in that time. I didn't realise the connection. And I asked the youngest doctor there, what was his name? Wharton Bollocksworth. I'll just hide his name for the moment. And I asked him that could it be that vaccines and their increasing use are causing autoimmune disease? He didn't think about it, but answered very quickly. He said, no, Mark, the vaccines have been thoroughly tested and been found to be entirely safe. Judy Wileman, in her book published back in 2020, showed that this was totally wrong. The vaccines had never been properly tested, and all of them had just been rushed into general use as quickly as possible.
We've seen we've seen things that was, of course, mentioned in the UK Parliament debate about AstraZeneca, and what the Australian government here did in removing it. It wasn't broadcast, it wasn't published, it was put on the government website. I think it was February this year, the 22nd, 23rd, somewhere around then. They just announced that it will no longer be, that they're no longer purchasing AstraZeneca, and it will no longer be administered.
That's right. It was just like sending soldiers to the Vietnam War, sneak them all out in the middle of the night from Sydney Harbour and don't tell anyone about it. It's just the same sort of mentality, putting our lives at risk.
And look, Dawn coming through there, registered nurse, that she had to have 3, and I guess by that she's talking, you know, the level of coercion amongst the healthcare workers. Of course, you know, those streams, I still think of some of the streams that, you know, emotionally bring the biggest impact to mind for me was the day that nurses in Western Australia laid down their uniforms. You know, so, and the nurses having to, and not just nurses, well, you know, nurses as well, but anybody in the healthcare system, even down to, you know, hospital orderlies and so on and so forth.
Right.
And Dawn, you know, sadly there is now saying that she now, as a result of having 3 coercions, that she's now autoimmune. Ian, you know, again, tragically, many comments like that, and we're sorry to hear that. You know, just saying that that you're not the same person, you know, since, and I guess the same level of coercion, you know, that people, you know, people were forced to make, either put a roof over their head, feed their families, and go out and do this.
Well, it's like that in America. They were even having advertisements telling children if they got the jab, they get superpowers. And they showed a little child running around in a cape, a bit like Superman. I mean, this is the sort of gaslighting they're giving to small children.
And I think, you know, many comments over the time has come through, you know, where those in the healthcare system, you know, nurses and such, you know, they know what it is in relation to informed consent. And they were, you know, sitting there having their mandatory stamp, but you know, absolutely bawling their eyes out whilst it was happening, because you know it was the choice they made. Of course, you know, the streams that I did, you know, that when they were busing students in.
That's right, in Sydney. That's right.
Well, and here in Perth, in Western Australia, into the convention centre. And the forms, and of course the stream, you know, at Joondalup Shopping Centre, Lakeside Joondalup, where they changed, you know, the form and were giving 14-year-olds consent. So, and you know, as Shannon's just saying then, sorry, Dawn is just saying then as well. You know, I've again had, since the mandates have been lifted, many comments of nurses coming in saying that they now want to get back into the healthcare system because they were stood down. And I mean, you know, you can believe everything that you can say. That the crisis of nurses, you know, the government will tell you that it was 200, 300, 400 nurses that actually stood down because of the mandates. But the number is well and truly in excess of that. That's right. You know, and potentially speculation, they run off their feet because of the injuries.
That's right, the jab injuries.
That's speculation. What we do know is the number of nurses that are still not, you know, Queensland have only just decided to reinstate their firefighters and their health professions.
Well, they need the firefighters now with all the bushfires raging in southern Queensland.
You know, but the nurses, you know, coming in, and you know, and I know that some have said that they are having contracts that very explicitly sets out a pecuniary fine for nurses if they talk about treating or the number of cases of adverse reactions that they're seeing on the hospitals. I've had, in particular, 2 contracts sent through, legitimate contracts that I've made inquiries. Of course, I've been wanting to get those nurses to come and, you know, validate that. But of course, if they do that, it will actually reveal and jeopardise their employment when they've been unemployed, you know, for the last couple of years. So I certainly don't want to do that. But for information's sake, they have brought in and forwarded off these contracts, and I've made a couple of exploratory telephone calls in relation to this, and confirmed, you know, that I'm satisfied that it is certainly creditable. The contract, in reading it, full of the legalese, you know, employment contracts of employment, to have clauses like that in there. Are you know,
this is
absolutely
real
disgusting.
It's real police state stuff now, persecuting the nurses and telling them they can't even speak about adverse reactions. This is total censorship.
Hang Loose Recluse talking about you know, he's only doing his music videos and some of his tourist videos of late, but he is saying that that Nobby Noble should set up his own podcast channel. And let's see how many people come in there. You did make, if you're still online there, Nobby, you did make a comment about having a discussion with Dr. Mark on Restream so that you can join that. Quite happy to do that. Restream, or Yardstream, I think you mentioned, costs about $99 in order to do that. So you can go over to Facebook, buy me a coffee. There you go, Nobby. Buy me a coffee to the value of $99. I will set up the Yard stream and we'll put out the stream. We'll bring you in, bring Dr. Mark Lofts in, and you can go your hardest so that people can see the name, see the person behind the keyboard. More than happy to do that. You cough up the 99, I'll set up the stream. So we'll just pick up on a few more comments. And
Keyboard Warriors Wild, eh?
yeah, is that the name of the podcast stream?
It probably will be.
So yeah, there we go. Well, you don't have to do Facebook, Nobby. Well, I'll make it even easier for you, given that you know your way around a keyboard. Just type in Freedom Media WA, buy me a coffee. That will take you directly to the page where you will be able to buy the equivalent value of the yard stream. You can make that anonymous or not, but I can absolutely assure you, putting it out on this stream right now, this will be the accountability that you do that, I'll set up the stream, and then let's go. We'll introduce you to those of the audience of Freedom Media WA in a slow chat, of course with Dr. Mark Lofts. So you don't have to then worry about going up onto Facebook. So yep, you're now saying you can set it up on Rumble for free, but you mentioned Yard Stream, and hence the reason why I'm saying that. So last call, yeah, Jared certainly would like to see that. And the last call for any of your comments coming through, and really thank you for those that have commented and those still watching. A slow chat with the usual gremlins with the technical issues. I did have to last week do a few updates on some softwares. Once I've got things running stable, I generally don't like to do software updates because it takes a tremendous amount of time to set things up, and I've only really just coming up to speed on getting things back to normal. And it's only when you do lengthy live streams that you realise that you have these issues. So yeah, of course, I mean that would be quite an easy comeback to come, Nobby. Cash junkies for sure. It's not a cash junkie. It's well, you mentioned Yard Stream. That's the cost associated with that. Of course, this platform, nobody makes money from this. You're here on your own time.
That's right.
You were here from
willingly gave it.
4:30 to 8:30 on Friday night. But again, so I think you've had enough commentary there. Nobby, thank you, Jared, for that comment. Yeah, it doesn't seem as though there's any more comments or perhaps any questions that you may want whilst Dr. Mark is here answered. But yeah, two very, very important debates in the UK that we've seen. Andrew Bridgen and his XF debate. Hopefully he gets in the next coming weeks that 3-hour debate that he talked about, and also then hopefully we get to see that some of this then translates and drip feeds down here in Australia. That we will start to see some of these debates in our parliament here taking place. Yeah, let's hope so. The challenge is out there. That many are wanting to see if you want to put up the challenge, and halves of $99 for Yard Stream. Half of 99 makes it certainly not $5, Nobby. So, but there you go. So on that note, I think we will say good afternoon wherever you may be, and yeah, thank you very much for your comments and joining this particular slow chat. So, Dr. Mark, thank you as always.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.